Hello, I'm Arthur Reed. Welcome to the World War II History Channel, where we explore the pivotal moments and untold stories of the greatest generation. Long before the first shots echoed through the winter pines, the war was already being fought in the quiet, empty kitchens of home. Close your eyes and imagine a small, cobblestone village nestled in a gentle valley. It is early morning, and a soft, gray mist clings to the rooftops. Just a few years ago, the air here would have been thick with the warm, comforting scent of yeast, toasted oats, and sweet butter melting over freshly baked rolls. The bakery at the corner would have been a beacon of light and warmth, its windows fogged from the heat of the ovens, filled with the cheerful hum of neighbors greeting one another. But now, a heavy, gray silence has fallen over the town. The bakery windows are dark, the glass cold to the touch. The shelves inside, once overflowing with golden crusts and dusted with soft white flour, sit bare and waiting. The grand, sweeping promises of the war machine, the loud parades, and the bright banners have all faded away, leaving behind only the quiet, gnawing reality of scarcity. In these shadowy kitchens, we find the true, hidden heart of the struggle. Picture a mother standing by her hearth in the pale light of dawn. The house is freezing, the breath blooming in little white clouds from her lips. She is trying to make a single loaf of bread stretch just one more day. The flour is no longer pure and white, it is heavy, dark, and mixed with things that were never meant to be baked. Sawdust from the local mill, dried potato peelings, crushed acorns, anything to add weight, anything to trick the stomach into feeling full. They call it ersatz, the substitute. It is a word that has crept into every corner of their lives. Ersatz coffee made from roasted chicory root that smells faintly of bitter earth. Ersatz butter that holds no sweetness, melting into a watery sheen. But this mother, with hands roughened by cold water and endless worry, needs this heavy dough with all the tenderness she possesses. She shapes it, bakes it, and when she slices it for her younger children, she does so with a steady hand. She watches them eat the dark, dense bread, and she smiles, a quiet, reassuring smile, telling them she has already eaten, that she isn't hungry. This is the everyday heroism of the home front. It isn't loud. It earns no medals. It is the silent, profound sacrifice of a mother going to bed with an aching, empty stomach so her children might sleep peacefully. It is from these dim, quiet kitchens that the young boys were sent away to the front. They were just teenagers, really. Boys whose coats hung too loosely on their narrow shoulders, whose boots were slightly too big. When they packed their rucksacks to leave, their mothers tucked small, precious things into the woolen folds. A hard heel of that dark bread, wrapped carefully in brown paper. A single, bruised apple saved from the autumn harvest. Perhaps a small tin of watery jam, guarded like a treasure for months, just for this day. When they hugged at the train station, enveloped in the hiss of white steam and the cold wind, neither spoke of the hunger. The boy did not say how light his mother felt in his arms, how fragile she seemed. The mother did not say how terrified she was that this small parcel of food would be the last meal she would ever give her son. They only smiled, holding on to the brave, fragile illusion that everything would be all right, that the pantry would soon be full again, that the war would end before the snows grew too deep. And so, the boys traveled into the dark forests of Europe, carrying not just the weight of their rifles, but the heavy memory of those bare shelves. They dug their trenches into the frozen, unyielding earth, the damp cold seeping through the soles of their boots and settling deep into their bones. When the night stretched out, long and perfectly black, they would huddle together for warmth, pulling their gray woolen coats tight against their chins. In these quiet, stolen moments of rest, beneath the canopy of shivering pine trees, they did what soldiers have done since the beginning of time, they thought of home. They pulled crumpled, folded letters from their breast pockets. The paper was thin, worn soft at the creases from being read 100 times over. By the dim, flickering light of a single stub of a candle, a young boy would read the faded ink of his mother's handwriting. She would write of the village, of the frost on the windows, of the neighbor's dog. She would write that the harvest had been manageable, that they were staying warm, that she had managed to find a little extra sugar and was saving it in a glass jar for the day he walked back through the front door. It was a beautiful, gentle lie. He knew the sugar was a myth. He knew the hearth was cold. He knew she was writing the letter by the same dim candlelight he used to read it, rationing the wax just as she rationed the potato dust. But he traced the loops of her handwriting with a dirty, freezing finger and let the warmth of her love wash over him. The shared fiction was a shield they both held up against the terrifying reality of the world. These physical connections to home, the delicate paper of a letter, the woven fabric of a field cap, the rusted tin of a forgotten rationing cup, these are the tangible echoes of the past. They hold the quiet whispers of the millions of ordinary people who simply tried to survive in an extraordinary time. Connecting with these historical artifacts, holding a piece of the past, helps ground us in the reality of their struggles and their humanity. If you find yourself deeply moved by the history of this era, or if you simply love exploring the visual stories of the Second World War, from the European trenches to the Pacific Fleet, you might find comfort and fascination in exploring genuine World War II memorabilia, or sitting down to watch the beautifully sweeping film Midway, available on Amazon Prime. It is a wonderful way to honor these stories and immerse yourself in the textures of the past. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the autumn of 1944 bled into a bitter, punishing winter, the reality of the German supply lines began to collapse entirely. The boys in the forests waited for the horse-drawn wagons to bring the heavy, insulated containers of hot soup that had been promised to them. They waited for the dark loaves of bread. But as the days grew shorter and the snow began to drift in soft, blinding flurries through the bare branches, the wagons came less and less. When food did arrive, it was a cruel mockery of sustenance. A thin, watery broth with a few floating cabbage leaves. A piece of hardtack biscuit that had to be soaked in melted snow just to keep from breaking a tooth. The gnawing ache in their stomachs became a constant, living companion. It was a physical weight, a hollow drumming that made their heads light and their limbs tremble. They tightened their leather belts, notch by notch, pulling the cold canvas of their uniforms tighter against their shrinking waists. They began to forage in the frozen woods, scraping away the snow to find bitter roots or the last, frozen berries clinging to thorny bushes. They shared everything. If a soldier found a single, forgotten potato in the bottom of a ruined cellar, he did not eat it alone. He brought it back to the fire, sliced it into paper-thin translucent rounds, and handed a piece to each of his shivering comrades. In the depth of their deprivation, the simple act of sharing a crumb became an act of profound, quiet love. They were no longer fighting for ideology, or for the loud voices on the radio. They were fighting simply to keep each other alive until the morning sun broke through the gray clouds. And then, the whispers began. Drifting through the snowy trenches like ghosts, rumors began to circulate about the new army moving toward them from the west. The Americans. The German propaganda ministers had painted the Americans as soft, spoiled children. They told the young, starving boys in the trenches that the Americans were a weak, decadent people, incapable of enduring the harsh, brutal realities of a European winter. They said the Americans would crumble at the first sign of true hardship, that they were an army of shopkeepers and actors, completely unsuited for the frozen misery of the front lines. But as the young German soldiers sat around their smokeless fires, rubbing their freezing hands together, their empty, aching stomachs whispered a different question. They looked at their own threadbare coats, their boots patched with cardboard, their empty tin cups. They wondered, in the deep, secret quiet of their hearts, what an army from across the ocean might look like. What did a country so vast, untouched by the bombs that had leveled their own bakeries, feed its sons? They tried to imagine it, but their minds, clouded by hunger and exhaustion, struggled to conjure the images. They could only dream in the colors of their own past, the memory of a warm bowl of stew, the smell of roasted apples, the soft, crumbly texture of a real, white roll. They did not yet know that just a few miles away, moving through the very same snow and the very same freezing fog, was an army whose pockets were filled with things they hadn't seen in years. They didn't know about the foil wrappers, the colorful tins, the sweet, intoxicating scent of vanilla and real chocolate. For now, they were simply boys in the dark, shivering in the shadow of a dying war, holding tightly to their mother's letters and waiting for the dawn. The stage was set in the freezing stillness. The hunger had hollowed them out, making them empty vessels, completely unprepared for the overwhelming, staggering shock of what they were about to discover hidden in the winter snow. The cold does not merely surround you in the winter forest, it enters you, slowly, until it settles like a second, heavier heartbeat deep beneath your ribs. Imagine standing in a boundless cathedral of ancient, towering pines. The snow is so deep it swallows the sound of your own footsteps, leaving only the fragile, crystalline silence of the frozen woods. For the young boys in the gray coats, this silence was not peaceful. It was heavy. It was the sound of a world that had forgotten them, a world that had ground to a halt, leaving them stranded in a sea of white. As the weeks turned into endless, agonizing months, a new kind of suffering took root in the trenches. It wasn't the sudden, terrifying violence of the artillery, but something much quieter and much more insidious. It was the hunger. This was not the simple, fleeting appetite one feels after a long day of work. This was a profound, hollow emptiness that lived constantly in the pit of the stomach. It was a physical ache that made their hands tremble when they tried to strike a match, a dizzying lightness that washed over them every time they stood up from the frozen earth. To understand their world, you must understand the taste of their survival. The rations that trickled down to the front lines had become a grim parody of food. The foundation of their existence was the daily bread, but it was bread in name only. They called it Kammersprat. In the early days of the war, it had been a heavy, dark rye, hearty, and sustaining. But now, it was a dense, gray brick, baked with desperation. Picture a teenage soldier sitting on an upturned ammunition crate, his breath pluming in the frosty air. He pulls a chunk of this bread from his pocket. It is so hard that it feels like stone against his palm. To eat it, he must use the heavy handle of his trench knife, chipping away at the crust just to break off a manageable corner. When he finally places a piece in his mouth, there is no comfort in the flavor. It tastes of bitter earth, of potato starch, and, unmistakably, of sawdust. The millers back home had been ordered to stretch the flour with wood shavings. The soldiers knew this. They could feel the fine, fibrous grit against their teeth. Yet, they ate it with a quiet, desperate reverence. Every crumb that fell to the snow was carefully retrieved by numb, dirt-stained fingers. They would hold the tough morsels in their mouths for a long time, letting the warmth of their own saliva slowly soften the brick-like texture, tricking their bodies into believing they were receiving nourishment. When a boy found a section of the crust that was slightly softer, perhaps baked with a little more actual grain, he wouldn't keep it for himself. He would break it in half, turning to the shivering friend beside him, and press it gently into his palm. A silent gift in a loud war. But bread alone could not warm the blood. In the biting chill of the morning, when the frost coated their eyelashes and their boots felt like blocks of ice, they craved something hot. They craved coffee. Real coffee, however, was a phantom, a luxury lost years ago to the blockades and the crumbling supply lines. In its place, they had ersatz coffee. The preparation of this substitute drink was a daily ritual, a pathetic but necessary anchor to their humanity. They would forage in the sparse clearings, digging through the deep snow to find whatever the forest might offer. They gathered acorns, chicory roots, and sometimes roasted barley if they were incredibly fortunate. They would crush the hard, brown acorns with the butts of their rifles, reducing them to a coarse, uneven powder. In a blackened, dented tin cup, they would melt snow over a tiny, smokeless fire, a fire kept small to avoid the watchful eyes of the enemy. When the water finally came to a weak, tepid boil, they stirred in the crushed acorns. The liquid that steeped in that cup was dark and muddy. When they lifted it to their cracked lips, the smell that met them was not the rich, roasted, comforting aroma of a cafe in Munich or Berlin. It smelled faintly of charred wood and damp soil. The taste was sharply bitter, leaving an astringent coating on the tongue. It offered no caffeine, no true warmth, and no comfort. But they drank it anyway, cradling the warm tin between their frostbitten hands, closing their eyes, and trying desperately to remember. They would sit together in the quiet twilight, sipping the dark water, and talk in hushed whispers about the kitchens they had left behind. "Do you remember," one would ask softly, "the smell of roasted beans in the morning? How my mother would pour the hot milk, and the steam would fog up the kitchen windows." The other boy would nod, his eyes fixed on the dying embers of their little fire, his mind miles away. "I remember the sugar," he would reply. "Just a small spoonful, melting into the dark, making it sweet and thick." They sustained themselves on these memories, feeding their starving souls with the ghosts of flavors they hadn't tasted in years. This quiet suffering, this slow, agonizing withering of young bodies in the cold, is a part of history that is so often glossed over by the grand maps and the sweeping narratives of generals and campaigns. The true, human face of the war was found in the sunken cheeks of these boys, in their hollowed eyes, and in the desperate, resourceful ways they tried to survive. It is a reality that is deeply sobering to witness, and while words can paint a picture, there is a profound weight in seeing the unfiltered truth for yourself. If you feel a deep calling to understand the unvarnished, human reality of this era, I want to gently share a resource with you. There is a deeply moving collection available on Gumroad featuring unseen, raw images and videos of the war. These are the quiet, uncensored moments of daily survival, the faces of the soldiers, and the harsh realities that are often too restricted or sensitive to be shown on traditional platforms. It offers a rare, unflinching look at the true cost of history. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the winter deepened, the physical toll of this diet became impossible to ignore. The uniforms that had fit them perfectly in the autumn now hung off their frames like borrowed clothes. Their leather belts were pulled to the very last notch, and still, they slipped down their narrow hips. When they removed their heavy steel helmets, their hair was thinning, their skin pale and almost translucent in the winter light. Simply walking from one end of the trench line to the other became an act of sheer endurance. The snow dragged at their boots, pulling them down, and their bodies, devoid of any real caloric energy, fought them with every step. They moved like ghosts through the trees, their movements slow, deliberate, and painfully exhausted. Yet, they did not complain. To complain was to admit defeat, to give voice to the terror that they might slowly starve to death in this forgotten forest. Instead, they wrapped their scarves tighter, leaned against the frozen earth, and simply endured. But the mind cannot be starved into submission as easily as the body. In the dead of night, when exhaustion finally pulled them into a shallow, fitful sleep, the dreams would come. These were not nightmares of battle. They were something far more cruel. They were dreams of abundance. A young soldier would dream that he was walking through a bright, sunlit market square. The air would be filled with the intoxicating scent of roasting meats, of fresh, warm apples sprinkled with cinnamon, of thick, creamy butter melting over golden potatoes. In his dream, he would reach out, his mouth watering, his heart swelling with a joy so profound it brought tears to his sleeping eyes. He would bring the feast to his lips. And then, he would wake up. The cruelest moment of every day was the transition from the golden warmth of the dream back to the biting, gray reality of the trench. He would open his eyes to see the frost crystallized on the wool of his blanket. His stomach would contract with a violent, empty cramp, a harsh reminder that the feast was only an illusion. He would lie there in the dark, the ghost of the cinnamon still lingering in his mind, and silently weep, the tears freezing hot against his cold cheeks. The tragedy of their situation was compounded by the silence of the command. The officers, themselves growing thinner by the day, spoke of impending supply drops, of special rations being moved to the front. But the boys in the dirt knew the truth. They looked at the gaunt faces of their sergeants and saw the same hollow desperation mirrored back at them. The mighty logistics machine they had been promised was completely broken, shattered by endless winter and relentless skies. They were completely alone. The forest was an island, cut off from the rest of the world by an ocean of snow. They existed on the absolute jagged edge of human survival, keeping their hearts beating with nothing more than hot water flavored with dirt and bread made from the very trees that surrounded them. As they peered over the snowbanks, looking out into the dense, foggy tree-line, they naturally assumed that their enemy was suffering the exact same fate. After all, this was war. War was cold. War was starving. War was a shared misery that spared no one. They imagined the Americans shivering in their own trenches, boiling their own weeds, chewing on their own leather straps just to quiet the hunger. It was the only thought that made their own suffering bearable, the belief that the misery was equal. They could not possibly conceive of what was actually moving through the trees toward them. They could not imagine the canvas bags filled with bright, colorful tins, the carefully wrapped foils, the dense, rich blocks of sugar and cocoa. They were entirely unprepared for the sheer, staggering weight of an enemy that marched on a full stomach. The illusion of shared suffering was about to be shattered, replaced by a profound, life-altering shock that would forever change the way they viewed the world, the war, and the men they had been sent to kill. Even the wind in the frozen pine branches seemed to carry secrets that winter. Picture the deep woods at twilight. The snow is falling softly, large, heavy flakes drifting down like white feathers, slowly covering the bruised and scarred earth. In their shallow, makeshift trenches, the young men pull their woolen collars up over their noses, their breath creating little, fragile pockets of warmth in the freezing air. They are profoundly isolated. The vast, loud machinery of the world feels millions of miles away from this quiet grove. Here, there are no newspapers delivering the morning headlines. There are no grand maps drawn on heavy oak tables. There is only the silence of the falling snow, and the things they whisper to each other when the darkness finally settles. For months, the voices on the crackling radios back home had painted a very specific, very confident picture of the world across the ocean. The propaganda ministers, sitting in their warm, brightly lit offices far away from the biting frost, spoke with booming, echoing voices. They told these shivering boys that the Americans were a remarkably soft people. They called them an army of clerks and actors, a decadent culture raised on jazz music and far too much sugar. They promised that a nation so deeply accustomed to luxury and ease would simply shatter against the harsh, unforgiving anvil of a European winter. They painted the Americans as children playing a dangerous game, entirely unprepared for the bitter, biting reality of the frozen front lines. But when you are 19 years old, and you have not felt the warmth of a real hearth in weeks, the word soft takes on a completely different meaning. Imagine a bunker carved into the frozen, unyielding mud, reinforced with damp pine logs that smell of sharp sap and wet earth. Inside, two young soldiers share a single, threadbare blanket, pulling it tightly across their narrow shoulders. One of them is trying to mend a tear in his glove with stiff, clumsy fingers, while the other watches the faint, blue glow of the moon filtering softly through the bunker's entrance. They speak in hushed, fragile tones, careful not to wake the exhausted, hollow-cheeked men sleeping nearby. "Do you think it's true?" the younger one asks, his voice barely a breath, hanging in the cold air. "What they say about them on the radio?" His friend stops his slow sewing for a moment, looking down at his own worn, mud-caked boots. "I don't know," he replies softly. "But if they are as spoiled as the ministers say, what do you think they eat?" It is such a simple, innocent question, but in the starving dark, it holds the absolute weight of the world. They do not talk about the caliber of enemy tanks or the speed of their airplanes. They talk about pockets. They wonder what an American soldier carries in his coat. If a nation is so rich, so hopelessly decadent, would they send their boys into the deep cold without something thick and heavy to keep them warm? Would they let them go to sleep hungry? The German boys try to imagine an army that isn't hollowed out by endless rationing, an army whose mothers haven't forgotten the taste of real butter or the comforting smell of roasted meat. In their minds, the American soldier becomes a strange, mythical figure, a phantom woven entirely from radio static, whispered rumors, and their own desperate, growling stomachs. Finding these deeply personal moments, these quiet, vulnerable conversations shared in the dark beneath the snow, takes countless hours of reading through fragile, faded diaries and translating delicate letters that have been hidden away in dusty attics for decades. It is a gentle, careful work to piece together the human heart of history, rescuing these whispers before they fade entirely into the past. If you find peace and value in these stories, and if you would like to support the massive research and time it takes to craft these documentaries, I would be incredibly grateful if you considered leaving a small tip, even just $1, on my Ko-Fi page. It truly helps keep this history alive and allows me to continue bringing these quiet voices to you. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. When the sun slowly rose, painting the snowy hills in pale, gentle shades of lavender and rose, the whispers of the night would fade, but the curiosity lingered, heavy in the morning mist. The boys would sit with their backs pressed against the cold earth of the trench, pulling out their small, crumpled pieces of paper and their stubby, worn pencils to write home. They never wrote about the rumors. They never wrote about the gnawing fear of the unknown. They knew their mothers already had far too much to worry about, standing for hours in the long, empty lines for a single loaf of bread in the darkened cities. Instead, they wrote about the quiet beauty of the snow falling on the pines. They wrote about a small, brown robin that had landed near the trench, a tiny flutter of life in a world of gray and white. But occasionally, hidden carefully between the lines of forced, brave cheerfulness, a subtle anxiety would seep through the graphite. "We hear we may be moving west soon," a boy might write, his handwriting slightly shaky from the deep chill in his bones. "They say new troops are arriving across the lines. Please keep my old room warm for me, Mama. I think of the stove in our kitchen every single night." They were brave, in the quiet, enduring way that ordinary people are brave when they have absolutely no other choice. They did not want to be heroes in a grand, sweeping saga written in history books. They just wanted to be warm. They wanted to take their boots off. They wanted to go home. As they waited, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The fog would roll in, thick and heavy from the low valleys, wrapping the ancient trees in a soft, white shroud. It was a beautiful, haunting landscape, like a painting washed in watercolors. In this endless white expanse, every snapped twig sounded unnervingly loud, every dark shadow playing tricks on the eyes looked like a man moving silently through the mist. The German boys, with their sunken cheeks and tired, ancient eyes, would stare out into that fog for hours on end. They were deeply, profoundly tired. The kind of heavy exhaustion that sleep cannot fix, an exhaustion of the spirit. They leaned heavily on their cold rifles, their minds drifting gently between the golden memories of their childhoods and the strange, impending reality of the Americans they had heard so much about. What would happen when they finally met in the woods? Would the Americans turn and run away in the snow, just as the radio had so confidently promised? Or would they bring the full, terrible weight of a world completely untouched by famine? One young corporal, barely 20 years old, wrote a diary entry by the fading light of a dying ember, shielding the page with his body. "We are told they are soft," he wrote, the pencil scratching gently against the rough, fibrous paper. "But a soft man does not cross an entire ocean to fight in the snow. I wonder if they are just like us. I wonder if they are shivering in their own coach right now, looking up at the exact same moon, wishing they were sitting at a wooden table with their families." This was the quiet, heartbreaking tragedy of the front line. Beneath the heavy wool uniforms, beneath the loud, angry politics and the roaring, unfeeling machinery of nations, they were all just boys lost in the woods. Boys who missed their mothers. Boys who were terribly hungry. Boys who were frightened of the dark. The whispers from the west grew steadily louder as the days crept on, turning from rumors into a physical presence. The distant, low rumble of engines could sometimes be felt vibrating through the frozen earth, a deep, rhythmic hum that settled in the center of their chests. It wasn't the erratic, sputtering, desperate sound of their own exhausted supply trucks. It was a steady, relentless, powerful thrum. The sound of pure abundance. The sound of an endless, unstoppable tide rolling toward them through the dark winter. They tightened their thin, frayed scarves around their necks. They checked their meager, depressing rations, the hard, stone-like bread, the bitter, dark acorn dust. They gathered their quiet resilience around themselves like a protective cloak. The mythical Americans, the soft, spoiled children of the radio broadcasts, were no longer just a bedtime story told in the bunker. The thick winter fog was finally beginning to lift. The agonizing waiting was coming to an end. Soon, they would see with their own weary eyes what a nation of plenty brings to the freezing, starved woods of Europe. And the reality of that inevitable encounter would be more shocking, more overwhelming, and more deeply human than anything they could have ever whispered to each other in the dark. There is a specific kind of cold that does not just touch the skin, but settles deep within the quiet corners of the soul. Imagine a forest so vast and ancient that the trees seem to touch the very edge of the sky, their dark, heavy branches bowing under the weight of an endless winter. The world here is painted entirely in shades of frost and twilight. The snow does not fall with the gentle, dancing grace of a holiday evening. It descends with a quiet, relentless permanence, burying the paths, silencing the streams, and wrapping the forest in a heavy, unbroken shroud of white. In this silent world, every sound is muffled, swallowed by the drifts, leaving only the delicate, crystalline whisper of ice forming on the bark of the pines. It is here, in the deepening shadows of the afternoon, that we find the young men who have been entirely forgotten by the grand, sweeping maps of their generals. They are huddled in shallow depressions carved into the frozen earth, wrapped in woolen coats that have worn dangerously thin at the elbows and the shoulders. The fabric, once heavy and protective, now offers little more than a fragile illusion against the bitter wind. They pull their collars up to their cheekbones, exhaling slow, trembling plumes of white breath that vanish instantly into the gray air. To understand the profound vulnerability of these moments, you must look closely at their hands. They are hands that should be holding schoolbooks, or gripping the polished handles of a plow, or resting gently on a sweetheart's waist. Instead, they are red and chapped, the knuckles split from the dry, freezing wind. And in these quiet, agonizing hours of waiting, these hands seek the only comfort left to them. They reach deep into the pockets of their greatcoats. A pocket, in times of peace, is a place of small, everyday treasures. It holds a smooth pebble, a brass coin, a folded handkerchief smelling faintly of lavender soap, or the warm, crumbly remnants of a morning pastry. But in the deep winter of the forest, a pocket becomes a stark, physical reminder of everything that has been lost. A young boy pushes his numb fingers deep into the coarse lining, searching with a desperate, quiet hope. He traces the heavy seams, feeling for a forgotten crumb of that hard, dark bread, or perhaps a single, stray grain of coarse sugar that might have fallen from a torn ration wrapper weeks ago. He finds nothing. The pockets are completely, painfully empty. There is no food. There is no extra pair of dry socks. There is no sudden miracle hidden in the wool. There is only the lint, the cold air, and the hollow, echoing ache in his own stomach. This emptiness is not merely the absence of a meal, it is the absence of a future. It is the physical manifestation of a supply line that has completely shattered, a promise broken by the leaders who sent them into the dark. The hunger is no longer just a passing sensation, it has become a constant, living shadow, a heavy weight that drags at their limbs and clouds their minds with a dizzying, floating exhaustion. Yet, In this profound emptiness, the human spirit does an extraordinary thing. It quietly refuses to break. When the fingers find no crumbs, they often find something else, tucked carefully against the chest where the heartbeat is warmest. A piece of paper. The soldier pulls it out with the utmost reverence. The edges are soft and frayed from being handled 100 times. The paper is brittle, the ink faded, but it is the most valuable thing he possesses. It is a letter from home. By the fading, pale light of the winter sun, he reads the words again. He sees his mother's slanted handwriting, describing the frost on the kitchen window, the way the neighbor's chimney smokes in the early morning, and the quiet prayers she whispers for him every night. He can almost smell the faint scent of the home fires trapped within the fibers of the paper. For a fleeting, beautiful moment, he is no longer shivering in a frozen trench. He is sitting by the hearth, the golden light washing over his face, safe and entirely loved. And then, he takes a small, dull stub of a pencil from his other pocket. He rests the paper on the cold steel of his helmet, steadying his trembling hand as best he can. He begins to write back. This is where we witness the quietest, most heartbreaking heroism of all. He does not write about the empty pockets. He does not tell her that his boots are slowly freezing to his feet, or that he has not tasted anything warmer than melted snow in days. He does not mention the terrifying, hollow feeling in his chest when he looks out at the endless white trees. Instead, he creates a gentle, loving fiction. He writes that the winter is cold, but the coats are thick. He tells her that the field kitchens brought up a hearty, warm stew just yesterday, and that his stomach is full. He writes that he is resting comfortably, surrounded by good friends, and that she absolutely must not worry about him. He pours all of his remaining strength into these words, crafting a shield of comforting lies to protect the heart of the woman who raised him. He would rather freeze in the dark than let a single drop of his suffering fall onto her shoulders. These delicate, fading letters, written with shivering hands in the dead of night, are the truest, most unfiltered records of the human heart. We have left. They hold the raw, uncensored emotions of ordinary people caught in the terrifying currents of history. Finding these intimate, unvarnished stories takes an immense amount of time, delicate translation, and a dedication to preserving the quiet voices that the grand history books so often ignore. If you find yourself deeply moved by these unfiltered human experiences, and if you want to explore the history of this era beyond the polished narratives, I would love to invite you to join our quiet, close-knit community on Patreon. There, we share ad-free podcasts, dive deeply into the raw, unblurred letters and diaries of the war, and explore the deeply personal realities of the past together. It is a wonderful space for those who truly want to understand the fragile human side of history. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the daylight finally surrenders to the creeping, blue dusk, the temperature in the forest drops with a sudden, frightening swiftness. The air grows so crisp it almost crackles against the skin. The soldier carefully folds his letter, returning it to the hollow pocket, pressing it flat against his ribs. The letters cannot provide physical heat, but they provide the emotional anchor needed to survive the night. In the trench, the boys huddle closer together. They are not grand warriors standing proudly against the horizon, they are just frightened teenagers, leaning back to back to share the meager, failing warmth of their bodies. A boy with blonde, unwashed hair rests his head softly on the shoulder of the boy next to him. They do not speak. They only breathe, their chests rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic synchronization. Someone carefully unfastens a canteen, the water inside already slushy with ice. He takes a tiny sip, barely moistening his cracked lips, and passes it to his friend. There is no food to share, no warmth to give, so they share the only thing they have left, their presence. Their shared suffering binds them together with a thread stronger than iron. When one shivers violently, the others press closer, wrapping their thin arms around him, a silent vow that no one will be left to freeze alone in the dark. In these quiet hours, as the stars emerge like cold, sharp diamonds through the breaks in the pine canopy, their minds begin to wander, carried away by the relentless, dizzying hum of starvation. They stare out at the blank, snowy horizon, and the whispers begin again. The rumors of the Americans. Their empty pockets make the rumors seem almost hallucinatory. How could an army exist without empty pockets? They try to imagine the supply trains they have heard about, endless cars filled with wool blankets, thick leather boots, and strange, wonderful foods wrapped in bright paper. It feels like a fairy tale, a story invented to torture them. They look at their own torn seams, their threadbare mittens, and they simply cannot fathom the sheer weight of a nation that provides for its men so completely. If the Americans are truly out there, somewhere beyond the snowy ridge, what will they look like? Will they have the same sunken, hollow cheeks? Will they have the same haunted, exhausted eyes? The German boys desperately want to believe that the enemy is suffering just as deeply as they are. It is the only way the universe makes sense. To be starving while your enemy is full is a psychological terror too vast to comprehend. So they wait in the freezing dark. They listen to the wind howling softly through the upper branches, a lonely, ancient sound. They hold tightly to their mother's letters, and they keep their hands buried deep in their empty pockets. They do not know it yet, but the endless, quiet misery of this frozen forest is about to be shattered. The phantom army of the West is drawing closer with every passing hour, bringing with them a reality so unimaginably foreign, so overwhelmingly abundant, that it will break the German soldiers' understanding of the world long before the first shot is ever fired. But for tonight, there is only the snow, the cold, and the gentle, tragic heroism of a boy lying to his mother so she might sleep peacefully. Out of the morning mist, the shadows began to move, changing the shape of the world forever. Imagine the absolute stillness of a winter dawn, deep within a forest that feels as old as the earth itself. The night has finally, mercifully passed, leaving behind a pale, fragile light that filters slowly through the canopy of heavy, snow-laden pines. A thick, silver fog has rolled in from the valleys, settling over the scarred landscape like a soft, woolen blanket. It obscures the craters, hides the fallen timber, and wraps the world in a quiet, dreamlike haze. It is the kind of morning where the air is so cold, so profoundly still, that you can hear the delicate sound of a single pine needle dropping onto the crusted snow. In their frozen, shallow trenches, the young German soldiers are waking from a fitful, shallow slumber. They do not wake with the energy of youth. They wake slowly, their bodies stiff and aching, their minds clouded by the relentless, heavy fog of starvation. A boy, no older than 18, softly brushes the crystallized frost from his pale eyelashes. He pulls his thin, worn collar tighter around his neck, his breath blooming in a small, white cloud that hangs briefly in the freezing air before vanishing. He leans his weary head against the cold earth of the parapet and looks out into the endless, shifting gray of the tree-line. For weeks, they have been staring into this exact same fog. Their eyes, hollowed by hunger and exhaustion, have played endless, cruel tricks on them. They have seen phantoms in the swaying branches. They have mistaken the dark trunks of ancient oak trees for advancing infantry. They have jumped at the sudden, sharp crack of a branch breaking under the weight of the snow, their hearts pounding against their ribs like trapped, fragile birds. They have been waiting, suspended in a terrible, quiet anxiety, for the mythical army of the West to finally reveal itself. And then, on this quiet, silver morning, the shadows in the distance do not sway with the wind. They step forward. At first, the young boy in the trench blinks, rubbing his tired eyes with a dirt-stained, woolen mitten. He thinks it is just another illusion, another trick born from a stomach that has not known a full meal in months. He stares intently into the mist, holding his breath so that his own chest does not make a sound. About 200 yards away, moving quietly through the dense, fog-draped pines, a line of figures is slowly materializing. They are walking deliberately, their boots crunching softly against the deep snow. The boy does not reach for his rifle. He does not shout an alarm. The sheer, overwhelming surrealism of the moment roots him to the spot. He simply watches, paralyzed by a quiet, dawning awe. He reaches over and gently, silently, taps the shoulder of the older corporal sleeping beside him. The corporal stirs, opens his eyes, and follows the boy's trembling, outstretched finger. Together, without making a single sound, they watch the ghosts emerge from the tree line. As the fog shifts and thins for a brief, fleeting moment, the details of these phantoms begin to come into focus. And it is in these small, quiet details that the German soldiers experience a psychological shock far more profound than any artillery barrage. The propaganda ministers on the radio had promised them a soft, broken enemy. They had painted the Americans as a fragile, pampered people who would weep in the cold, who would shatter against the harsh reality of a European winter, who would stagger through the snow just as weakly, just as miserably, as the German boys themselves. The soldiers in the trench had clung to this lie. It was their only comfort, the desperate belief that the misery of the freezing woods was a shared, universal suffering. But the men moving through the trees are not shivering. They are not hunched over, clutching their ribs against the biting wind. Through the lens of a scratched pair of binoculars, passed silently from trembling hand to trembling hand down the line of the trench, the boys see the truth. They see men wearing thick, heavy coats of a strange, solid olive-drab color. The fabric does not look patched, or threadbare, or stiff with frozen mud. It looks impossibly warm. It looks dry. They see heavy, sturdy boots lifting out of the snow with a steady, relentless energy. But the most staggering detail of all is what these men carry. On their backs, the Americans wear canvas. Haversacks that are visibly, undeniably swollen. They are thick and heavy, pulling down slightly on the broad shoulders of the men carrying them. To a starving boy whose own pockets hold nothing but lint and a desperate letter from home, the sight of a full, heavy pack is something out of a fairy tale. How can a man carry such a burden through the deep snow and not collapse? How can they walk with such upright, confident posture? The answer, blooming slowly and painfully in the minds of the boys in the trench, is simple and terrifying. These men are full. They have eaten. They have slept under heavy blankets. Their blood is warm. The corporal lowers the binoculars, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly in his lap. He looks at the young boy beside him. They do not say a word, but the shared look between them contains the absolute collapse of their entire worldview. In that one, quiet glance, they both realize that the war they thought they were fighting, a war of endurance, of who could suffer the longest, is already over. You cannot outstarve an enemy that brings an entire, untouched continent of abundance with them into the woods. There were so many hidden layers to this vast conflict, secrets moving quietly beneath the surface of the battlefields that shaped the fate of these ordinary boys. The grand, sweeping history we often hear usually glosses over these quiet, unseen realities. If you are captivated by the untold stories and the invisible forces that truly steered the course of the era, I would love to invite you to join my free email newsletter. When you sign up, I'll send you a beautifully crafted, free ebook called The Shadow War, 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. Every week, we take deep, fascinating dives into the forgotten facts, the espionage, and the hidden heroes that lived in the shadows of history. It is a wonderful way to uncover the mysteries of the past together. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. The silence in the German trench is absolute, heavy with the weight of this new, impossible reality. The soldiers simply sit and watch the Americans pass in the distance, a slow, methodical procession of olive-drab figures drifting through the pale morning light. No shots are fired. The distance is too great, the fog too unpredictable, and the exhaustion on the German side too deep. But there is also a profound, unspoken hesitation. To fire a weapon would be to break the spell, to invite the terrible, crushing reality of this new, well-fed giant down upon their fragile, freezing heads. For now, they prefer the quiet. They prefer to simply observe, to let the shock wash over them in the stillness of the snow. The young boy leans his head back against the dirt wall of the trench and closes his eyes. For weeks, he has tried to picture the enemy, imagining monsters with sharp teeth or cowards running in fear. He had never imagined ordinary men, walking comfortably through the cold, entirely unbothered by the winter that is slowly killing him. He thinks of the heavy packs. He wonders, with a quiet, desperate curiosity, what is inside them. His mind, starved and fragile, begins to drift, inventing impossible treasures hidden within the thick canvas. He imagines dry, woolen socks, thick enough to cushion his aching heels. He imagines small, tin stoves that burn without smoke, offering a pocket of glorious, life-saving heat. And, inevitably, his mind drifts to the thing he craves above all else. He imagines food. Not the bitter, dark sawdust bread he has been chewing on for months. Not the thin, watery cabbage soup that leaves him feeling hollower than before. He imagines the things his mother used to bake in the peaceful years. He imagines the smell of yeast rising in a warm kitchen, the golden crust of a soft roll, the sweet, intoxicating scent of melting butter and coarse sugar. Does the American haversack hold such miracles? Does a country that can send 1 million men across a violent ocean also send them the comforts of a warm home? The cruelty of the vision makes his stomach cramp violently. He pulls his knees up to his chest, wrapping his thin arms tightly around his legs, trying to make himself as small as possible in the cold. Further down the line, a quiet murmur begins to ripple through the shivering men. It is the sound of an illusion shattering, piece by delicate piece. A grizzled sergeant, a man who has fought on 3 different fronts and survived the bitterest campaigns, stares out into the fog with eyes that look suddenly very old and very tired. He reaches into his tunic, pulls out a small, battered tin case, and extracts a tiny, half-smoked cigarette he has been saving for weeks. He lights it with a trembling match, taking a slow, deep drag, letting the meager smoke fill his lungs. He exhales slowly, watching the gray smoke mingle with the white mist of the forest. He knows exactly what he has just seen. He knows that courage, ideology, and discipline, the things he has drilled into his boys for years, mean absolutely nothing against the sheer, overwhelming weight of endless supply. A starving man can fight like a lion for a day, perhaps 2. But a man who is fed, a man who is warm, can fight forever. The line of American soldiers slowly disappears back into the rolling banks of fog, their quiet, crunching footsteps fading into the vast silence of the woods. They vanish as mysteriously as they appeared, leaving the frozen landscape looking exactly as it did before. But for the German boys left behind in the trench, the world will never be the same. The forest feels colder now, the shadows longer, the isolation more profound. The mythical enemy is real, and they are not suffering. They are strong, they are equipped, and they are moving steadily forward. The haunting vision of those swollen canvas packs remains burned into their minds, a torturous reminder of everything they do not have. As the morning light slowly brightens the pale winter sky, the boys sit in silence, listening to the gentle, rhythmic hum of their own empty stomachs. They wait in the freezing cold, deeply humbled, deeply frightened, wondering when the ghosts will return, and what miracles, or what terrible destruction, they will bring with them out of the trees. Sometimes, the heaviest weight a man can carry is not a weapon, but a sudden, unexpected hope. Deep within the silent, sleeping heart of the winter forest, the pale afternoon sun had already begun to surrender to the coming night. The sky above the towering pines was turning a soft, bruised shade of indigo, and the shadows stretched long and thin across the unbroken snow. The wind had died down to a gentle, icy breath, leaving the woods in a state of absolute, cathedral-like stillness. It was a beautiful, deeply lonely world, wrapped entirely in white and gray. Moving through this quiet twilight was a small patrol of German soldiers. They were not marching, they were simply walking, their heavy, dragging footsteps breaking the frozen crust of the snow with a rhythmic, exhausted crunch. There were only 4 of them, boys who had been woven together by months of shared cold and shared hunger. Their gray greatcoats, once a symbol of pride, were now faded and stiff with frost, hanging loosely over shoulders that had grown tragically sharp and thin. They walked with their heads bowed, their frosted breath mingling in the still air, pulling the thick wool of their collars up over their cracked lips. They were not looking for the enemy. They were far beyond the energy required for hostility or grand heroism. They were simply looking for a place to rest, a hollow beneath the roots of an ancient tree where they might escape the biting wind, a place where they could huddle together and close their burning eyes, if only for an hour. As they crested a small, softly sloping ridge, the forest opened up into a tiny clearing, bathed in the gentle, blue light of the evening. And there, in the very center of the untouched snow, rested something that did not belong. It was a patch of olive drab green, stark against the blinding white. The patrol halted instantly. A quiet, breathless tension rippled through the 4 boys. The youngest, a quiet youth named Johannes who still kept a pressed edelweiss flower inside a letter from his mother, gripped the cold wood of his rifle. But he did not raise it. There were no voices. There were no footprints leading away into the trees, save for the deep, wide tracks of boots that had clearly hurried away hours ago. They stood frozen, their eyes locked on the object resting against the base of a snow-covered stump. It was an American haversack. A supply pack, dropped perhaps by a scout who had been startled, or discarded by a soldier who had found it too heavy in the deep drifts. For a long time, no one moved. The bag sat there in the twilight, a solitary ambassador from a world they could barely comprehend. In their exhausted, starved minds, it wasn't just a piece of canvas equipment. It was a mystery. It was a closed door waiting to be opened. Slowly, with a quiet nod from the oldest among them, Johannes stepped forward. The snow crunched softly beneath his worn boots. Every step felt impossibly loud in the vast quiet of the clearing. He approached the pack as one might approach a sleeping animal, with a mixture of reverence and profound caution. When he finally reached it, he slowly sank to his knees. The damp cold of the snow seeped instantly through his thin trousers, but he barely noticed. He took off his right mitten. His hand, pale and trembling slightly from the cold, hovered over the thick, sturdy fabric. He touched it. The canvas was impossibly thick. It was tightly woven, heavily treated to repel the wet snow, and it felt luxurious compared to the thin, rotting fabric of his own uniform. He ran his numb fingers along the heavy, reinforced stitching, tracing the contours of the bulging pockets. The sheer quality of the material was the first quiet heartbreak. It spoke of factories that had unlimited thread, of a nation that could afford to wrap its soldiers in strength and durability. These physical connections to history, the tactile weight of canvas and brass, the tangible objects that survive the passage of time, they hold the quiet, profound stories of the millions who lived through these freezing winters. Feeling a connection to this era is a deeply moving experience. If you find yourself wanting to immerse yourself further into this history, or if you appreciate the visual and physical remnants of these profound stories, you might find a quiet joy in exploring genuine World War II memorabilia, or sitting down to watch the beautifully sweeping and historically rich film Midway, available on Amazon Prime. It is a wonderful, grounding way to honor these stories and understand the textures of the past. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Johannes looked back over his shoulder at his 3 friends. They had crept closer, forming a silent half-circle behind him, their hollow eyes wide and expectant. They looked like children gathered around a Christmas tree, terrified that the presence beneath it might just be an illusion. Johannes turned his attention back to the heavy metal buckles. They were cold, solid brass, uncorroded and perfectly stamped. He curled his trembling fingers around the thick canvas strap and, with a soft, metallic click that seemed to echo through the trees, he undid the first buckle. Then the second. He slowly pulled back the heavy flap of the haversack. What rose from the inside of that pack was not just a sight, but a scent. For months, the only things these boys had smelled were damp earth, the sharp tang of gunpowder, the smoke of wet pine needles, and the sad, bitter aroma of roasted acorn dust. But as the canvas opened, a strange, phantom scent drifted up into the freezing air. It was the faint, sweet smell of waxed paper, of cellophane, of real tobacco, and something faintly resembling chocolate. It was the smell of a peaceful grocery store on a Sunday afternoon, transported by some unimaginable miracle to the darkest woods of Europe. The boys leaned in closer, their breathing shallow and fast. Inside the pack, neatly arranged and perfectly dry, were small, heavy boxes sealed in waxed cardboard. There were cans made of bright, shining metal, completely free of rust. Johannes reached inside, his hand shaking so violently now that he had to steady his wrist with his other hand. He pulled out a small, heavy tin. It was painted a vibrant, olive green, but the label wrapped around it bore bright, sharp lettering. They could not read the English words, but they understood the language of the packaging. The precise, careful way the tin was sealed, the little metal key attached to the bottom for opening it. It was a masterpiece of care and logistics. He handed the tin up to the older soldier, whose hands were covered in rough, woolen mittens. The older man took it gently, weighing it in his palms. It was dense. It was heavy. It contained meat. Real, preserved meat, sitting right there in his hand. Johannes reached into the bag again. This time, he pulled out a small rectangular box, wrapped in heavily waxed paper. He carefully picked at the seal with his dirty fingernail. The paper gave way, revealing a small block wrapped in silver foil. He peeled the foil back, just a fraction of an inch, and the scent of pure, rich cocoa and sugar hit the cold air. He gasped softly. It was a Hershey bar. He didn't devour it. He didn't tear into it with the frenzy of a starving animal. Instead, a profound, overwhelming sorrow washed over his pale face. He looked at the perfect, unbroken chocolate, and then he thought of his mother back in Munich, standing for 6 hours in the freezing rain just to receive a handful of flour mixed with sawdust. He thought of his little sister, whose teeth were growing soft from malnutrition. He looked at his friends. The older soldier was holding the tin of meat against his chest, his eyes closed, silent tears freezing onto his cheeks as they fell. The other two boys were staring into the open haversack, paralyzed by the sheer volume of wealth contained in one single man's forgotten bag. They realized, in that quiet, heartbreaking moment beneath the pines, the absolute futility of their struggle. If an American soldier could accidentally drop this much food of such unimaginable quality, and simply walk away, leaving it in the snow without turning back, then the war was already lost. They were fighting a ghost, a machine of endless abundance that could bury them in bread and chocolate before ever needing to fire a bullet. Slowly, with a tender, almost reverent grace, Johannes broke the chocolate bar into 4 exactly equal pieces. He did not take a larger piece for himself, though his stomach was twisting in knots of agony. He handed a small, dark square to each of his friends. They did not speak. Words would have shattered the fragile holiness of the moment. They placed the chocolate on their tongues. They closed their eyes. As the rich, sweet cocoa began to melt against the warmth of their mouths, sending a rush of forgotten sugar into their exhausted bloodstreams, they wept. It was a quiet weeping. The tears flowed silently, washing clean tracks down their soot-stained faces. It was not tears of joy, though the sweetness was wonderful. It was the sorrow of remembering what it felt like to be human. It was the sudden, sharp memory of childhood, of Christmas mornings, of peace. The taste of the chocolate unlocked the doors they had so carefully sealed in their minds to survive the horror of the trenches. They sat together in the snow, for enemies of the men who had packed that bag, sharing a communion of absolute grace in the dying light of the day. They didn't feel hatred for the Americans in that moment. They felt a strange, detached awe. The older soldier carefully pocketed the tin of meat, wrapping it in a spare rag to keep it safe. Johannes closed the heavy canvas flap of the haversack, securing the brass buckles once again. They didn't leave the bag behind. They took it with them, carrying it gently by the thick strap, as if it were a fragile artifact from a beautiful, impossible dream. As they resumed their slow, dragging walk through the snowy forest, the darkness finally settled completely over the trees. But the air felt a little less cold. The heavy, suffocating weight of the winter had been pierced by a single, accidental act of abundance. In their pockets, they carried the lingering scent of vanilla and waxed paper. In their hearts, they carried the quiet, devastating knowledge that the world across the ocean was entirely different from the one they had been told about. And as they faded into the shadows of the pines, leaving the small clearing empty and still once more, the taste of that single square of chocolate remained with them, a sweet, lingering ghost in a world of bitter ice, a reminder of the quiet humanity that survives even in the deepest, coldest woods. In a world made entirely of frost and broken iron, the gentle crinkle of silver paper sounded like a whispered secret. Imagine the heavy, pressing darkness of an underground dugout. The earth above is frozen solid, locking the young men below in a damp, earthen tomb lined with rough-hewn pine logs. The only light comes from a single, sputtering candle stub, its weak golden flame trembling with every gust of winter wind that howls down the narrow entranceway. The air is thick with the scent of wet wool, unwashed bodies, and the bitter tang of the miserable, roasted acorn water they try to pass off as coffee. Into this dim, gray purgatory, a small piece of the outside world has been brought. It sits in the center of an overturned wooden crate, illuminated perfectly by the solitary candle. It is a simple rectangle, barely larger than a boy's hand. But to the sunken, hollow eye staring at it, it is a staggering impossibility. It is a chocolate bar, recovered from the dropped canvas haversack in the snowy woods. What captivates them first is not what is inside, but the packaging itself. In their homeland, a nation choked by years of blockades and total war, everything is rough, dull, and synthetic. Paper is heavy and coarse, made from pulped rags and sawdust. Colors have faded from their lives, replaced by the uniform gray of the military and the bleak, dusty tones of rationing. But this object shines. It is wrapped in genuine silver foil. A young soldier named Elias, his cheeks hollowed by months of near starvation, leans in closer. He does not touch it yet. He just looks at the way the candlelight catches the delicate ridges of the silver. It is pristine. It is unbroken. It speaks of a world where factories still have the time and the resources to make things beautiful, a world where a simple sweet treat is protected with a layer of precious, shining metal. The sheer excess of it is paralyzing. Slowly, Elias reaches out. His hands are terribly scarred by the cold, the knuckles swollen and raw. His fingers tremble as they brush the smooth surface. The crinkle of the foil in the silent bunker is unnervingly loud. It is a sound they have not heard since they were children, long before the uniforms, before the marching, before the sky filled with ash. He slips a dirty fingernail under the edge of the wrapper and gently, carefully, begins to pull it back. As the seal breaks, the air in the cramped dugout shifts. The smell of damp earth and sweat is suddenly pierced by an aroma so rich, so deeply intoxicating, that it causes an actual, physical ache in their empty stomachs. It is the heavy, sweet scent of roasted cocoa beans, woven with the pure, bright notes of real vanilla and cane sugar. It smells like peace. For a moment, the bunker dissolves. The agonizing cold recedes. Elias closes his eyes, and the scent carries him away, thousands of miles and a lifetime back, to a small, brightly lit kitchen in a Bavarian village. He is 7 years old again. It is Christmas Eve. His mother is standing by the stove, her apron dusted with white flour, stirring a pot of melting chocolate. The warmth of the hearth fire is on his face, and he is safe. He is entirely, profoundly safe. He opens his eyes, and the cruel reality of the damp, freezing dirt walls rushes back in. A single tear, hot and heavy, escapes the corner of his eye and cuts a clean path down his soot-stained cheek. This is the true, hidden face of history. It is not found in the sweeping arrows drawn on generals' maps, or in the loud, booming speeches broadcast over the radio. The real story of this era is found right here, in the quiet, desperate tears of a starving boy smelling vanilla in the dark. It is a history of immense vulnerability, of shattered illusions, and of small, fragile human hearts trying to survive the machinery of the world. These unvarnished, deeply intimate moments are so rarely shown in the sanitized history books. If you feel a quiet calling to truly understand the raw, unfiltered reality of these young men, to see the history that is often kept hidden, I want to gently recommend a resource to you. On Gumroad, there is a carefully curated collection of unseen media, raw, deeply human images and quiet video fragments of the war that capture the true, harsh, and uncensored reality of daily survival. It is a profound way to bear witness to the lives of those who walked through that winter. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. The silver foil is pulled all the way back now, resting like a glowing halo around the dark, dense block of chocolate. The letters pressed into the surface are entirely foreign to them, but the meaning is universally understood. There are 4 boys in the bunker. Elias looks around at them. Their faces are pale, their eyes wide and locked onto the prize. In another world, in another time, perhaps boys might fight over such a treasure. But starvation and shared misery have forged a delicate, unbreakable brotherhood among them. There is no greed here. There is only a profound, almost holy reverence. Elias takes his trench knife. The blade is dull and scratched, meant for cutting through wire and digging in the frozen mud. He wipes it clean on the edge of his woolen coat. With absolute, meticulous care, he presses the heavy blade down into the center of the chocolate. It breaks with a satisfying, thick snap. He divides it again, and then again, until there are 4 perfectly equal squares resting on the shining foil. He passes them out, one by one. The boys take their portions with shaking hands. They do not throw the chocolate into their mouths. They hold it between their cold fingers, marveling at the weight of it, the slight softening of the cocoa butter against the meager warmth of their skin. Finally, almost in unison, they place the small squares on their tongues. The sensation is overwhelming. For months, their palates have known nothing but the bitter, grainy scrape of sawdust bread and the watery emptiness of melted snow. Now, their mouths are flooded with absolute, unadulterated richness. The sugar hits their starving bloodstreams like a rush of pure adrenaline. The fat of the cocoa butter coats their throats, soothing the raw, persistent ache of the cold. It is the most wonderful thing they have ever tasted. And yet, it is also the most devastating. Because as the chocolate melts, as the euphoria of the sugar fades into a lingering sweetness, a new, terrible realization settles into the damp air of the bunker. The oldest boy, a quiet corporal who has not smiled since autumn, lowers his head into his hands. His shoulders begin to shake with silent, suppressed sobs. The others do not look away, they reach out, placing gentle, comforting hands on his back. They understand completely. The chocolate is a miracle, yes. But it is a poison to their morale. They realize, with a sudden, crushing clarity, that their leaders have lied to them. They have been told they are the superior force, that the enemy is weak, that victory is just over the next snowy ridge. But sitting in the dirt, tasting the undeniable proof of American abundance, the illusion shatters into a million irreparable pieces. If the Americans can afford to wrap a simple piece of chocolate in silver and drop it carelessly in the snow, what else do they have? If they send their soldiers into the bitter winter with sugar and vanilla, how many tanks do they have? How many airplanes? How many warm coats and dry boots? The German boys look at their own boots, patched with cardboard and stuffed with stolen newspapers to keep out the frost. They look at their empty, lint-filled pockets. The gap between their reality and the reality of the men across the forest is too vast to bridge. The war is not a contest of bravery or spirit. It is a contest of steel, of grain, of endless supply. And in that quiet dugout, chewing the last sweet remnants of a Hershey bar, they know they have already lost. The realization brings a strange, heavy peace. The desperate, frantic hope of victory drains away, leaving only the simple, quiet desire to survive, to go home, to see their mothers again. Elias does not throw the wrapper away. He carefully smooths out the silver foil, pressing it flat against his thigh until all the wrinkles are gone. He folds it, once, twice, into a tiny, perfect square. He reaches into his tunic and tucks it gently inside the front pocket, right next to his heart, beside the frayed, faded letters from home. It is no longer just a piece of trash. It is a talisman. It is a reminder of a world that still knows sweetness, a world that exists beyond the artillery shells and the frozen mud. The candle finally burns down to the wood, sputtering in a small pool of wax before blinking out entirely, plunging the bunker back into absolute darkness. Outside, the winter wind howls through the ancient pines, a lonely, endless sound. But inside, the boys lie back against the damp earth, pulling their thin coats around themselves. They are still freezing. They are still in danger. But as they drift into a fragile, exhausted sleep, the scent of vanilla lingers softly in the dark, a small, foil-wrapped miracle that broke their hearts, and somehow, for just one night, made them feel human again. Memory, it turns out, does not live in the mind, it lives in the quiet, sudden breath of a forgotten scent. Imagine the deepest, darkest hour of the winter night, just before the dawn begins to paint the sky in bruised shades of violet and gray. Deep beneath the frozen crust of the earth, sheltered within the twisting, ancient roots of the pine trees, a small dugout is steeped in absolute shadow. The air inside this makeshift bunker is heavy, terribly cold, and utterly still. It smells of damp wool, of old snow, and of the slow, lingering decay of fallen autumn leaves. In this quiet tomb, a handful of young men are huddled together, seeking whatever fragile warmth they can draw from one another's exhausted bodies. They are boys who have forgotten what it feels like to be truly warm. The cold is no longer just a season, it is a permanent resident in their bones, an ache that settles deep in their joints and makes their breathing shallow and trembling. For months, their mornings have been marked by a bleak and joyless ritual. As the pale sun crept over the horizon, they would gather a handful of clean snow from just outside the dugout entrance. They would place it in a blackened, dented tin cup, holding it over the weak, smokeless heat of a tiny chemical tablet or a carefully guarded ember. When the water finally yielded and came to a tepid, bubbling boil, they would reach into their pockets for their meager rations. What they stirred into that water was an insult to the very concept of comfort. It was the ersatz, the bitter substitute born of blockades and broken supply lines. Crushed acorns, dried chicory root, roasted barley, and sometimes just burnt wood shavings. When the hot water hit this coarse powder, it offered no inviting aroma. It smelled faintly of mud and charred timber. It tasted of the earth, sharp and astringent, leaving a dark, gritty residue at the bottom of the tin. They drank it not for pleasure, but for the illusion of heat. They drank it because it was warm, and because wrapping their frostbitten hands around the heated metal of the cup was the only relief they would know all day. But on this particular morning, beneath the heavy canopy of the silent woods, the ritual is about to change. One of the older soldiers, a man whose face is lined with the quiet, devastating exhaustion of too many winters in the field, reaches into his heavy gray coat. His fingers, wrapped in fingerless woolen gloves that are unraveling at the seams, carefully retrieve a small object. It is a prize from a captured American haversack, a tiny, unassuming packet made of thick, moisture-proof paper. He holds it up in the dim, filtering light of the bunker. The other boys lean in, their sunken eyes tracing the unfamiliar shape. They do not know what it is. The English words printed on the side mean nothing to them. But they trust the older soldier, and they watch in absolute, breathless silence as he uses the very tip of his trench knife to gently pierce the seal. He tears the packet open. What happens next is not a sound, or a sight, but a sudden, overwhelming invisible wave. As the seal is broken, the cold, stale air of the dugout is pierced by a fragrance so rich, so deeply complex and intoxicating, that it feels almost like a physical blow. It is the scent of real coffee. Not the bitter, earthy ghost of chicory. Not the burnt memory of acorns. This is the pure, roasted, undeniable aroma of genuine coffee beans. In an instant, the heavy, dark smell of the bunker is completely eradicated. The scent blooms in the freezing air, filling the small earthen room with the perfume of a distant, peaceful world. For a long, suspended moment, no one moves. The boys simply sit there, their eyes wide, pulling the cold air through their noses, breathing in deeply, desperately. To smell this, after years of deprivation, is not just a sensory experience. It is a violent, beautiful collision with the past. The scent is a key, unlocking doors in their minds that they had deliberately bolted shut just to survive the psychological terror of the war. A young boy in the corner, barely old enough to shave, closes his eyes. The scent carries him away from the damp dirt walls. In his mind, he is no longer shivering in a frozen forest. He is back in Munich, walking down a cobblestone street on a crisp, bright Sunday morning. He can hear the soft, melodic chiming of the church bells. He can see the frosted windows of the local cafe. He imagines the delicate, fragile clink of a silver spoon against a porcelain saucer. He remembers his father sitting across from him, reading a broadsheet newspaper, a wisp of steam rising gracefully from a delicate white cup, carrying this exact, identical aroma into the warm room. The memory is so vivid, so heartbreakingly clear, that it makes his chest ache. He breathes in again, afraid that if he exhales, the scent will vanish, and the cruel, gray reality of the woods will rush back in to claim him. Finding these quiet, fragrant memories buried beneath the snows of time is a delicate, painstaking labor of love. I spend countless hours reading through fragile, faded diaries to rescue these whispers before they are lost to the wind. If you find comfort in these stories, and if you would like to support the massive research and time it takes to craft these documentaries, I would be incredibly grateful if you considered leaving a small tip, even just $1, on my Ko-Fi page. It truly helps keep this history alive and allows me to continue bringing these quiet voices to you. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. In the center of the bunker, the older soldier begins the careful, sacred work of brewing the miracle. He places a small handful of pristine, white snow into the battered tin cup. He holds it over the pale blue flame of a chemical tablet. They all watch the snow melt, transforming from opaque ice to clear, shimmering water. The water begins to steam, then to bubble. With absolute, trembling reverence, the soldier tips the small packet over the cup. A fine, dark brown powder cascades down into the boiling water. It is Nescafe, the soluble instant coffee that the American Army produces by the millions of tons. But to these starving boys, it is alchemy. It is magic. The powder hits the water and dissolves instantly, turning the clear liquid into a deep, dark, rich mahogany. A fresh cloud of steam billows up, carrying an even stronger, warmer wave of the roasted aroma. It smells like roasted nuts, dark chocolate, and the pure, sweet promise of home. The soldier gently swirls the cup, ensuring every single speck of the precious powder is dissolved. He does not take the first sip. Despite his own desperate, gnawing desire, he lifts the warm tin and passes it to the youngest boy, the one with his eyes still closed, lost in the memory of the Munich cafe. The boy opens his eyes. He takes the cup in both hands. The metal is beautifully, painfully hot against his raw, chapped palms. He brings it to his cracked lips, blowing softly across the surface to cool it, just as his mother had taught him when he was a small child. He takes a slow, tentative sip. The flavor is a revelation. It is smooth, robust, and completely devoid of the gritty, sour bitterness of the acorn water. The warmth of the liquid slides down his throat, a blooming ribbon of heat that settles deep in his hollow stomach. The caffeine, a stimulant his body has not felt in years, sends a gentle, awakening hum through his tired blood. But it is the emotional warmth that truly sustains him. In that single swallow, he feels a profound, absolute sense of comfort. He lowers the cup, letting out a long, trembling sigh. The ghost of a smile, fragile and small, appears on his pale lips. He passes the cup to the next soldier. One by one, they share the communion of the coffee. They pass the dented tin cup around the circle, in total, reverent silence. They do not speak. Words would only break the fragile spell that has been cast over the dugout. They simply sip, close their eyes, and let the warmth wash over them. As they sit together, smelling the lingering aroma in the cold air, a quiet, profound realization settles among them. It is the same realization they had when they saw the warm coats, the heavy packs, the silver-wrapped chocolate. They are fighting a nation that does not just equip its men to fight, it equips them to live. It sends them across the treacherous ocean not just with bullets and bandages, but with the familiar, comforting scent of a Sunday morning. It provides them with small, simple luxuries that tell a soldier he is cared for, that he is remembered, that his humanity has not been entirely surrendered to the machinery of war. The German boys look at the empty packet of Nescafe lying on the frozen dirt. They look at their own threadbare uniforms. They understand, with a quiet, heartbreaking clarity, the impossible gulf between their world and the world of the Americans. They are trying to hold the line with synthetic bread and roasted roots, while their enemy marches forward fueled by real coffee, real sugar, and the undeniable weight of a country that lacks for absolutely nothing. When the cup is finally empty, the older soldier uses his thumb to wipe the last, precious drop of brown liquid from the rim, licking it slowly to savor the fading taste. The chemical tablet burns out, plunging the bunker back into the gloom. The chill of the earth begins to creep back into their bones. The war is still waiting for them outside the timber walls. The snow is still falling. The artillery will soon begin its distant, thunderous drumbeat. But for this brief, miraculous fraction of time, they were not cold. They were not starving. They were not soldiers waiting for the end. They were simply human beings, huddled in the dark, finding a fleeting, beautiful peace in the scent of a familiar comfort. The coffee had not changed the outcome of the battle, and it had not stopped the terrible march of the winter. But as they pulled their collars tight and prepared to face the gray morning, the lingering aroma of the roasted beans remained trapped in the heavy wool of their coats. It stayed with them, a phantom companion, a quiet, sweet reminder of the world they had left behind, and a whispered promise that somewhere, beyond the frost and the iron, the warmth of a peaceful morning still existed. A single, sharp glint of metal in the snow can hold the weight of an entire shifting world. Imagine a quiet, hollowed-out stretch of woodland, long after the heavy guns have fallen silent and moved on. The sky is the color of pale slate, offering no warmth, only a soft, diffused light that seems to freeze the very air it touches. Here, the snow is not the pristine white of a holiday postcard, but a tired, ash-streaked gray, churned by heavy boots and the endless, exhausted shuffling of men who have been walking for far too long. A small group of German soldiers has stopped to rest beneath the sheltering arms of an ancient, snow-heavy oak. They do not speak. To speak requires energy, and energy is a currency they spent weeks ago. They simply lean against the rough bark, their thin coats pulled tightly around their sharp shoulders, their eyes hollow and fixed on the frozen ground. Their world has become a monochrome nightmare. Everything they wear, everything they carry, is dull. Their rifles are scratched and rusted. Their canteens are dented and chipped. Their uniforms are a fading, lifeless field gray, blending perfectly into the bleak and dying landscape around them. But then, an older soldier named Matthias sees it. He is a man who, in another life, worked with his hands in a warm, brightly lit workshop. He was an apprentice clockmaker, a man who understood the gentle beauty of precision, of polished gears and carefully shaped metal. Now, his hands are wrapped in dirty rags, his fingernails cracked from the cold. But his eyes still know how to look for the light. Just a few yards away, resting in a shallow drift of snow where an American patrol had camped the night before, something is catching the weak afternoon sun. It is a small, perfect cylinder. Matthias slowly pushes himself away from the tree. His boots crunch softly in the snow as he walks toward it. He moves cautiously, the way one might approach a sleeping bird, afraid that any sudden movement might cause the vision to shatter and vanish. He reaches down and picks it up. It is a tin can. But it is unlike any tin can Matthias has seen in years. In Germany, metal has become a ghost. Everything is melted down, repurposed, stretched, and thinned until it rusts away into nothing. The tins that hold their own meager, terrible rations are made of cheap, blackened iron that leaves a metallic, bitter taste on the tongue. But this American can is different. It is heavy, solid, and coated in a golden, protective lacquer that gleams in the dull light like bright, polished brass. It has no rust. It has no dents. It is a tiny, perfectly engineered vault. Matthias brushes the loose snow from the top. He runs his thumb over the smooth, flawless rim. He turns it over in his hands, marveling at the sheer, unapologetic quality of it. Attached to the side, held by a small bead of solder, is a tiny metal key. It is meant to open the tin, designed to be used once and then carelessly thrown away. To Matthias, this tiny key is a revelation. He thinks of the factories back home, struggling to produce even the simplest screws, while somewhere across the ocean, a machine is stamping out millions of these perfect, disposable little keys, just so a soldier doesn't have to struggle to open his lunch. He carries the bright can back to the tree. The other men slowly lift their heads, their exhausted eyes drawn to the gleam of the metal. They gather around Matthias, a silent circle of gray ghosts, staring at this golden artifact from another universe. Matthias peels the little key from the side. He threads the small metal tab at the top of the can through the eye of the key, just as the stamped instructions illustrate. He begins to turn it. The metal yields with a soft, deeply satisfying tearing sound. It does not jam. It does not break. It peels away in a perfect, continuous ribbon of bright tin, curling smoothly around the key. The sound of that peeling metal is impossibly loud in the quiet forest. It is the sound of an industry that has not been touched by a single bomb. It is the sound of endless, unbothered abundance. As the lid pulls back, the vacuum seal breaks with a soft, gentle hiss. And then, the smell hits them. It is meat and beans, preserved in a rich, dark tomato sauce. It is not a suggestion of food, like the watery, translucent soups they are used to. It is dense. It is real. The aroma rises in the freezing air, thick and sweet and savory, carrying with it the ghost of a warm kitchen, the phantom heat of an oven, the quiet, impossible promise that somewhere in the world, people are still eating until they are full. To find these quiet, devastating moments, the soft click of a tin can opening, the smell of tomato sauce in a frozen forest, the silent tears of a clockmaker holding a piece of discarded metal, we have to look far beyond the official records and the grand, sweeping maps of the war. We have to dive into the hidden, fragile pages of personal diaries and the uncensored letters written by men who never expected their words to be read by history. Uncovering these deeply human stories is a gentle, painstaking journey, and it is a journey I love sharing with those who want to understand the true, beating heart of the past. If you find peace in these raw, unvarnished narratives and wish to support the long hours of research that go into preserving them, I would love to welcome you to our community on Patreon. There, we share ad-free, extended podcasts and take deep dives into the uncensored letters and raw, unblurred realities of this era. It is a wonderful, quiet space for history lovers to gather. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Matthias holds the open can in his hands. He does not eat immediately. He is paralyzed by a profound, heavy sorrow. He looks at the rich, red sauce, the whole, perfect beans, the generous chunks of meat. He thinks of his wife. He imagines her standing in the endless, freezing lines in the city square, waiting for hours just to receive a handful of flour that has been cut with sawdust. He thinks of her thinning hair, her pale cheeks, the way her dresses hang so loosely on her frame now. He would give anything, absolutely anything, to be able to hand this beautiful, golden tin to her. He imagines the look of disbelief that would wash over her face. He imagines the warmth it would bring to her cold hands. The tragic cruelty of it all rests heavily on his shoulders. He is a soldier, standing in a frozen wood, holding more nutritional wealth in one hand than his entire family has seen in a month. And this wealth was simply left behind in the snow, discarded by an enemy who had so much of it that they didn't even bother to finish it. He pulls a small, wooden spoon from his tunic. He takes a delicate, trembling scoop of the food and places it in his mouth. The taste is overwhelming. It is salty, rich, and completely devoid of the bitter, chemical aftertaste that plagues their own synthetic rations. It tastes like life. It tastes like energy. It tastes like a world that has not gone mad. He swallows, closing his eyes as the heavy, caloric warmth settles in his empty stomach. Then, with the quiet, unbroken brotherhood born of shared misery, he passes the can to the man next to him. They share the single tin of rations among the 5 of them. Each man takes only one spoonful, leaving enough for the next. They eat in absolute, reverent silence. They chew slowly, holding the food in their mouths for as long as possible, letting the salt and the fat coat their tongues, closing their eyes to savor the fleeting, beautiful illusion of being full. When the can is completely empty, scraped clean down to the bright, shining metal of the bottom, the silence in the woods seems even deeper than before. The wind whispers softly through the high branches of the oak tree, scattering a fine dusting of snow over their shoulders. No one says a word about what this means. They don't have to. The realization sits heavy in the cold air between them. Before this moment, they could still harbor the fragile, desperate hope that the Americans were suffering just as they were. They could tell themselves that the cold was a universal enemy, that the enemy's supply lines were also stretching, freezing, and breaking in the deep winter. It was the only thought that made their own agonizing hunger bearable. But the bright, brass-colored tin has shattered that illusion forever. A nation that packages its food in golden lacquer, a nation that provides tiny, perfectly crafted keys to open it, a nation that fills its cans with thick meat and leaves them carelessly behind in the snow. That is not a nation that is struggling. That is a titan. Matthias looks down at the empty tin in his hands. It is just a piece of trash, a discarded remnant of an American soldier's quick lunch. But to Matthias, it is a message. It is a quiet, undeniable proof that the war is already over. They are not fighting men anymore. They are fighting factories. They are fighting an endless, shining river of brass and steel and meat that will simply flow over them, burying them in its sheer, unstoppable weight. He does not throw the tin away. He cannot bear to part with something so perfectly made. He carefully wipes the inside clean with a handful of snow. He wraps the bright metal in a spare piece of gray cloth and tucks it deep into his rucksack. Perhaps, he thinks, if he survives this terrible winter, he will take it home. He will place it on the mantelpiece in his quiet house, a strange, beautiful artifact from the day the illusion finally broke. The gray light of the afternoon slowly begins to fade into the deep, bruised purple of twilight. The cold sinks its teeth back into the forest, wrapping the trees in a biting, icy grip. The German squad slowly pushes themselves away from the oak tree. They adjust their heavy, useless rifles. They pull their frayed collars up around their necks. They begin to walk again, their boots resuming that slow, dragging rhythm through the deep snow. They walk back into the endless, monochrome nightmare of their reality. But as they vanish into the shifting shadows of the pines, the memory of that single, golden can walks with them. It is a heavy, quiet ghost, a taste of peace hidden in the dark, a shining, foil-wrapped miracle that broke their hearts and told them the undeniable truth of a world they could never hope to defeat. There are some things so terribly out of place in a ruined world, they feel like a dream you are afraid to wake from. Imagine a narrow, winding road, completely swallowed by the deep, unbroken snows of a bitter winter forest. The trees press in closely on either side, ancient pines bowing their heavy, white-draped branches as if in quiet mourning. The wind here does not howl, it only whispers, a steady, freezing breath that sweeps a fine dusting of powder across the frozen ruts in the earth. The sky above is a pale, milky gray, offering no warmth, only the silent promise that the snow will soon begin to fall again. Walking slowly down this lonely corridor of trees is a small patrol of German soldiers. They move like sleepwalkers, their heads bowed against the chill, their shoulders slumped under the weight of wool coats that offer little protection against the damp, biting cold. They are boys, mostly, though their faces are lined with the profound, gray exhaustion of men who have lived a lifetime in a single season. Their boots crunch softly in the snow, a hypnotic, steady rhythm that is the only sound in the vast, sleeping woods. They are terribly hungry. The hollow ache in their stomachs is a constant companion, a dull fire that never quite goes out. They have survived for weeks on the bitter memory of bread, chewing on hardened scraps of synthetic rations that taste of sawdust and ash. Every step they take is an act of sheer, quiet willpower. As they round a gentle bend in the road, the lead soldier, a quiet youth named Thomas, slowly raises his frostbitten hand. The patrol halts. There, resting silently in a deep drift of snow, is a machine from another world. It is an American military vehicle, a small, open-top Jeep painted in flat olive drab, abandoned where it had slid off the icy path and wedged itself firmly against the trunk of a fallen oak tree. The driver is long gone, vanished into the mist, leaving the small machine alone in the white wilderness. The German boys approach it with a profound, breathless caution. They do not raise their rusted rifles. They know, with the instinct of the hunted, that the area is empty. They are drawn to the vehicle not by a desire for war, but by a desperate, quiet hope. Where there is an American vehicle, there might be a forgotten blanket. There might be a dropped glove. There might, miraculously, be food. They gather around the freezing metal of the Jeep. In the back, resting beneath a heavy, snow-dusted canvas tarp, are several thick, olive-green bags. Thomas reaches out, his hand trembling slightly in its frayed, woolen mitten, and pulls the canvas back. It is a mail Jeep. The bags are filled with letters, thousands of them, bound in neat bundles with coarse twine. To a soldier, regardless of the uniform he wears, mail is a sacred thing. It is the fragile, paper thread that tethers a wandering soul back to the hearth, back to the kitchen table, back to the people who love him. The German boys look at the heavy canvas bags with a strange, melancholic reverence. They know that inside these bags are the same hopes, the same fears, and the same desperate prayers that their own mothers write to them by candlelight. But tucked carefully between two of the heavy mailbags, resting securely so it would not slide on the rough roads, is something else. It is a square, heavy cardboard box. It is not a military supply crate. It does not bear the harsh, stenciled black lettering of the quartermaster. It is bound in ordinary, domestic string, the kind a grocer might use to wrap a parcel of fresh apples. Thomas gently lifts the box from the Jeep. It is surprisingly heavy. The cardboard is slightly damp from the snow, and one corner is gently bruised, but it is otherwise completely intact. He sets it down on the cold metal hood of the Jeep. The other boys gather closely around him, their breath pluming in the freezing air, their hollow eyes fixed on the parcel. On the top of the box, written in careful, elegant, looping cursive with a dark blue fountain pen, is an address. Next to the American soldier's name and his strange, mysterious unit numbers is the return address. It is from a woman. A mother, living in a small, quiet town in the state of Ohio. There are custom stamps on the cardboard. There are postal markings that trace a journey of thousands of miles, across a vast continent, over a turbulent, dark ocean patrolled by submarines, through the chaotic, bombed-out ports of Europe, and finally, up into these freezing, isolated woods. With the tip of his bayonet, moving as delicately as a surgeon, Thomas cuts the grocer's string. It snaps with a soft sound. He folds back the flaps of the cardboard. Inside, carefully packed to prevent any shifting, are crumpled sheets of an American newspaper. Thomas pulls one out. Even in their starvation, the boys cannot help but stare at the paper. It is thick and clean. There are advertisements for movie theaters, for shiny new automobiles, for warm winter coats. It is a glimpse into a universe that has not been completely swallowed by the dark. Thomas pulls the rest of the newspaper away, revealing a round, brightly painted tin resting at the bottom of the box. The air around them is so cold it hurts to breathe, but as Thomas pries the lid off the tin, the forest seems to completely vanish. A scent rises from the open container that is so pure, so incredibly sweet, and so impossibly nostalgic that it physically staggers them. It is the deep, rich aroma of genuine vanilla extract. It is the smell of real, creamed butter. It is the intoxicating, golden scent of baked flour and caramelized sugar. Inside the tin, perfectly preserved, completely untouched by the mold and the damp of the winter, is a cake. It is a birthday cake. It is frosted with a thick, generous layer of white icing and decorated with small, careful rosettes of pale yellow sugar along the edges. It is exactly the kind of cake a mother would bake in her warm kitchen on a sunny afternoon, the windows fogged with steam, the radio playing a soft tune in the background. The boys stand frozen around the hood of the Jeep. No one speaks. The sheer, overwhelming humanity of the object paralyzes them. This is not a ration designed in a cold, unfeeling laboratory to provide mere calories. This is an act of pure, distilled love. It is a mother's heart, baked into sugar and flour, sent across the world to remind her son that he is cherished. To witness these quiet, hidden layers of history, to understand the incredible, secret journeys of a simple box crossing a perilous ocean, is to truly see the vast, unseen machinery of the war. There are so many stories hidden just beneath the surface of the grand historical timelines, stories of supply, of secret logistics, and of the profound emotional anchors that kept the world turning. If you find yourself captivated by these forgotten fragments of the past, I would love to invite you to join my free email newsletter. When you do, I will send you a complimentary copy of my ebook, The Shadow War, 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. Every week, we take deep, relaxing dives into the hidden heroes, the espionage, and the fascinating, quiet truths that lived in the shadows of history. It is a beautiful way to keep these stories alive. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. In the quiet stillness of the snow, Thomas looks down at the white frosting. His hands, wrapped in their ruined mittens, are shaking violently. It is not the cold that makes him tremble. It is a sudden, crushing wave of sorrow. He thinks of his own birthday, just 2 months ago. He had spent it huddled in a freezing mud trench, sharing a single, moldy potato with a boy who had later been lost in the artillery fire. He thinks of his own mother, standing in line in the dark, clutching her rationing card, hoping to trade an old heirloom just for a cup of coarse, synthetic flour. And then he looks at this cake. He realizes the staggering, terrifying truth of the American supply lines. If the United States military has the resources, the time, and the sheer, unfathomable logistical power to transport a delicate, freshly baked birthday cake from a kitchen in Ohio all the way to a snowdrift in a European forest, without it being crushed, without it rotting, without it being lost, then how can Germany possibly hope to win? They are fighting a nation that does not merely supply its soldiers with bullets and bandages. They are fighting a titan that delivers love through a war zone. They are fighting an enemy whose mothers can still bake, whose post offices still function, whose ships rule the seas so absolutely that a fragile tin of frosting can cross the Atlantic unharmed. The psychological weight of this realization is heavier than the snow falling on their shoulders. The illusion of their own superiority, the lies they have been told about the weakness of the Americans, all of it crumbles into dust before the undeniable proof of this simple, vanilla-scented cake. Slowly, with absolute reverence, Thomas uses his bayonet to slice the cake. The knife slides smoothly through the soft, moist crumb. He divides it carefully, making sure every single slice is exactly the same size. There are 6 boys, and he cuts 6 perfect pieces. He lifts the slice on the flat of his blade and offers it to the youngest boy in the patrol. The boy takes it with both hands, his eyes wide and bright with unshed tears. They do not devour it. They eat it with a slow, deeply solemn grace. They close their eyes as the rich, sweet frosting melts on their tongues. For a few, miraculous minutes, the agonizing hunger that has haunted them for months simply vanishes. They are flooded with the taste of pure comfort, the taste of peace, the taste of a home that is not their own, but feels universally warm. They chew in silence, listening to the soft rustle of the wind in the pine branches. They do not hate the American soldier whose name is on the box. In this quiet, suspended moment, they feel a strange, profound connection to him. They are all just boys, shivering in the woods, missing their mothers. When the last crumb is gone, they carefully wipe their mouths. Thomas places the empty tin back into the cardboard box, and rests the box gently back into the Jeep, pulling the canvas tarp down to protect the remaining mail from the snow. They leave the letters untouched. They take only the memory of the sweetness. They turn away from the abandoned Jeep and begin to walk again, their boots crunching softly on the frozen road. The wind picks up, swirling the snow around their ankles, urging them back into the dark reality of the war. They are still freezing. They are still lost in the woods. But their hearts are strangely quiet. The frantic, desperate hope for a military victory has been replaced by a heavy, peaceful resignation. The birthday cake from home has told them everything they need to know about the end of the war. As they fade into the gray shadows of the trees, carrying the lingering taste of vanilla and sugar, they walk not as conquerors, but as survivors, hoping only that they, too, might one day live in a world where a mother can bake a cake in peace and send it out into a quiet, unbroken world. A single, fragile breath, held and released into the freezing night, can carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers. Imagine the world at the very edge of midnight, deep within the heart of a silent, snow-draped forest. The sky above is a vast, endless canopy of black velvet, pierced only by the distant, cold light of a million shivering stars. The wind has finally settled, leaving behind a stillness so profound, so absolutely complete, that the air itself feels like spun glass, beautiful, brittle, and incredibly sharp. In this quiet, frozen kingdom, the trees stand like ancient sentinels, their heavy branches bowing toward the earth under the gentle, crushing weight of the winter snow. Tucked away in the shadow of a ruined stone wall, a small group of young men huddle together against the biting chill. They are wrapped in gray woolen coats that have grown thin and threadbare from months of endless wear. They sit with their knees pulled tightly to their chests, trying desperately to preserve the tiny, fleeting pockets of warmth trapped between their bodies. Their faces are pale, their eyes hollowed by a weariness that reaches far beyond simple lack of sleep. It is an exhaustion of the spirit, a deep, quiet yearning for a hearth, for a soft bed, for a world that does not demand so much suffering. In moments like these, when the hunger has dulled to a familiar, hollow ache, and the cold has numbed the very tips of their fingers, the human mind seeks any small harbor of comfort it can find. For a soldier in the dark, that comfort so often came in the form of a simple, quiet ritual. The ritual of a smoke. But in the twilight of this deeply broken war, even that small solace had been taken from them. The supply wagons from the east, when they arrived at all, brought only the cruelest imitations of comfort. The tobacco ration had long since vanished, replaced by a harsh, bitter substitute they called ersatz. Picture a young boy, no more than 19, his hands shaking slightly as he pulls a crumpled piece of newspaper from his pocket. Inside is a small pinch of whatever dried leaves the quartermasters could sweep together, perhaps dried cherry leaves, stalks, or even wood shavings treated with chemicals. He rolls it clumsily in the dark, his numb fingers struggling to shape the rough paper. When he finally manages to light it, the smoke that fills his lungs is not soothing. It is acrid. It is sharp. It burns the throat and leaves a terrible, ashen taste on the tongue. It offers no peace, only a harsh reminder of everything their homeland has lost, of the factories that stand empty, and of the ships that no longer sail. They smoke it anyway, because the act of bringing a trembling hand to the lips is a familiar motion, a ghost of the peaceful days they left behind. But it brings no warmth to their shivering souls. Until, on this perfectly still night, a new discovery is brought into the quiet shadows of the stone wall. One of the boys, who had been out on a quiet listening watch near the edge of the American lines, returns to the group. He does not speak. He simply kneels in the snow, reaching deep into the heavy, patched pocket of his tunic. He pulls out a small, rectangular object and holds it out in the pale starlight. It is a pack of cigarettes, dropped or forgotten in the snow by an American soldier. The boys lean in, their breath pluming in the freezing air. To their tired eyes, the object is a marvel of impossible luxury. The packaging is not made of dull, recycled cardboard. It is pristine, wrapped tightly in a layer of clear, crinkling cellophane. The cellophane alone is a miracle, a material completely foreign to their world of rationing and desperate scarcity. It catches the faint starlight, gleaming like a precious jewel in the palm of the young man's hand. Beneath the clear wrapper, the pack itself is bright and perfectly printed. It bears the bold, clean colors of a nation entirely untouched by the deprivations of conflict. The boy peels away the cellophane. The sound is incredibly loud in the hushed winter air, a crisp, sharp crinkle that seems to hold the promise of a different world. He tears away the delicate silver foil at the top of the pack. Before a single match is struck, the scent reaches them. It is the smell of pure, golden Virginia tobacco. It is deeply earthy, sweet, and incredibly rich. To the German boys, whose senses have been starved of anything pleasant for an eternity, the aroma is completely intoxicating. It smells like a sun-drenched field in late summer. It smells like peace. It smells like a Saturday evening in a bustling, warmly lit city, where men in clean suits sit in comfortable chairs and read the newspaper without a single care in the world. These small, physical remnants of history, the bright packaging, the cellophane, the exact, tangible things that these young men held in their trembling hands, are the anchors that ground us to the past. They turn vast, sweeping history into deeply personal, human moments. Connecting with these artifacts helps us to truly feel the emotional weight of their journey. If you find yourself captivated by the quiet textures of this era, or if you simply love exploring the visual history of the Second World War, you might find profound comfort in exploring genuine WWII memorabilia, or immersing yourself in the beautifully crafted movie Midway, available on Amazon Prime. It is a wonderful way to honor the past and see the history brought to life. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. With utmost care, the young soldier taps the bottom of the pack, allowing a single, perfectly cylindrical cigarette to slide out. It is rolled in clean, stark white paper, entirely flawless, without a single tear or blemish. The tobacco is packed tightly and evenly. He places it between his cold lips. Another boy, his hands shaking with anticipation, strikes a small wooden match against a rock. The sudden flare of yellow light briefly illuminates their faces, hollow cheeks, tired eyes, and an expression of quiet, almost holy reverence. The boy cups his hands around the flame, a delicate shield against the winter night, and leans in. The tobacco catches instantly. He takes a slow, deep breath. The tip of the cigarette flares into a bright, cherry-red ember, a tiny, glowing beacon of warmth in the vast, freezing dark. As the rich smoke fills his lungs, a profound, visible transformation washes over him. The tension in his narrow shoulders suddenly melts away. He closes his eyes, his head dropping back against the cold stone of the wall. He holds the smoke in his chest for a long, quiet moment, letting the heavy, soothing blanket of nicotine calm his racing, exhausted heart. When he finally exhales, a thick, creamy plume of blue-gray smoke spirals up into the freezing air, drifting softly toward the stars. He does not keep it for himself. He opens his eyes, takes the cigarette from his lips, and gently passes it to the boy shivering beside him. This small, simple action is the very essence of human grace. In a world where they have absolutely nothing, where every single calorie and every shred of warmth is a matter of survival, they share this precious, fleeting luxury without a second thought. The cigarette moves around the small circle, passing from dirty hand to dirty hand, a glowing red ember tracing a line of brotherhood in the dark. With every drag, the terrible, biting reality of the winter forest is briefly pushed away. For those few, suspended minutes, they are not soldiers caught in the collapse of a dying army. They are just young men, sitting together, sharing a quiet smoke. The rich flavor coats their tongues, erasing the bitter memory of the acorn water and the sawdust bread. The warmth of the smoke in their chests feels like a gentle embrace, a reminder that they are still alive, that their bodies can still feel comfort. But as the cigarette burns down, turning to a long pillar of delicate gray ash, the quiet realization begins to settle over them once again. They look at the bright, perfect pack resting in the snow. They look at the smooth, white paper of the cigarette. And they understand, with a deep, heavy sorrow, the terrible gap between themselves and the men who dropped it. They understand that a country capable of growing, harvesting, curing, perfectly rolling, and wrapping millions upon millions of these exquisite cigarettes, just to send them across a violent ocean to comfort its soldiers in the mud, is a country that simply cannot be defeated. Their own leaders have asked them to fight with weapons that jam, with boots that fall apart, with food that makes them sick. Meanwhile, the Americans are fighting a war with the full, unbridled comfort of home right there in their pockets. The psychological weight of that single, beautifully made cigarette is heavier than a falling artillery shell. It does not shatter their bodies, but it gently, inevitably breaks their resolve. It tells them, in the softest, most comforting whisper, that the war is lost. The last boy in the circle takes the final drag, pulling the cherry close to his fingertips. He drops the tiny remnant into the snow, where it hisses softly and dies out, leaving only a tiny black scar in the pristine white powder. The silence of the forest rushes back in to fill the space. The cold wind begins to stir again, tugging at the fraying hems of their coats. The magical, suspended moment has passed. They are cold once more. They are hungry once more. But as they pull their knees back to their chests and lean their tired heads against the stone wall, the scent of the Virginia tobacco still lingers faintly in the air, caught in the heavy wool of their collars. It is a sweet, gentle ghost that will stay with them through the darkest hours of the night. It is a quiet reminder of the abundance of the world, a whispered promise that beyond this freezing forest, beyond the misery and the snow, warmth and comfort still exist. And as they drift into a fragile, exhausted slumber, wrapped in the quiet, sweeping arms of the winter, that lingering scent brings a small, peaceful dream of home. There is a profound, silent gravity found not in the thunder of the world, but in the simple, quiet weight of a cold object resting in the palm of a trembling hand. Imagine the deeply hushed stillness of a winter afternoon, right at the moment when the pale sun begins to surrender its weak light to the approaching dusk. The forest is a vast, slumbering cathedral of ancient, towering pines, their dark branches heavy and bowed under thick layers of unbroken snow. The air is so incredibly cold that it feels fragile, as if a single, sudden sound might shatter it like thin glass. In this frozen expanse, the world seems to have completely stopped breathing. Resting in the hollowed-out roots of a massive, fallen oak tree is a young soldier named Lucas. He is a boy who grew up in the gentle, rolling valleys of the Rhine, a boy who once knew the comforting rhythm of seasons, of planting and harvesting in the warm sun. But now, he is a ghost of that boy. His field-gray coat is stiff with frost, his shoulders slumped beneath a profound, inescapable exhaustion. The hunger inside him has long since passed the stage of a sharp ache. It is now a vast, hollow emptiness, a quiet echoing room inside his chest that leaves him feeling strangely light, as if a strong gust of winter wind might simply carry him away. Lucas is staring blankly at the snow just a few feet away, where the remnants of an American encampment from the day before lie partially buried in the fresh powder. There are no grand spoils of war here, only the discarded debris of an army that moves with relentless, hurried purpose. But something catches his tired eye. It is a small, dark cylinder, resting in a shallow depression in the snow. Slowly, drawing on a reserve of strength he did not know he still possessed, Lucas pushes himself up from the roots of the oak. He walks toward the object, his boots making soft, agonizingly slow crunches in the crust of the snow. He kneels beside it. He reaches out with a mitten that is completely frayed at the fingertips, exposing his pale, numb skin to the biting air. He brushes the snow away. It is a tin can, painted a dull, flat olive drab to hide it from the glint of the sun. Lucas picks it up. In that single, quiet moment, as the object leaves the snow and rests in the palm of his hand, a profound psychological shift occurs. It is not the color of the can, or the foreign English letters stamped perfectly onto its side, that shocks him. It is the sheer, undeniable weight of it. To understand the absolute terror of this weight, you must understand the world Lucas has been living in. For years, his country has been slowly suffocating. Everything in his life has become fragile, thin, and hollow. The bread he is meant to eat is light, puffed up with sawdust and potato starch. The paper he writes his letters home on is so fibrous and thin that his pencil frequently tears right through it. The very fabric of his uniform has been stretched and woven with synthetic fibers until it offers no real substance against the wind. His world is a world of desperate subtraction, where every single ounce of metal, every drop of oil, and every grain of wheat is rationed, weighed, and hoarded. But this American tin can in his hand is heavy. It is wonderfully, terrifyingly dense. He turns it over, feeling the solid, unyielding mass of it. It does not give under the pressure of his fingers. It feels like a solid block of iron, but he knows it is filled with food. The heavy, sloshing sensation inside tells him that it is packed with liquid. Lucas closes his eyes, his breathing growing shallow in the freezing air. He tries to comprehend the logistics required to place this heavy object into his hand. He knows, vaguely, of the vast, turbulent ocean that separates this snowy forest from the American homeland. He knows of the submarines that prowl the dark waters, of the desperate, perilous convoys. He realizes that to bring this kin to this specific forest, someone had to mine the ore. Someone had to forge the thick, flawless steel. Someone had to grow the food, harvest it, and seal it away. And then, a nation had to load millions of these heavy, dense cans onto ships, burn thousands of tons of precious fuel to carry them across a violent ocean, load them onto trucks, and drive them through the mud and the snow, all the way to the very front lines of the war. They did all of this to bring a soldier heavy, liquid-filled food. They were shipping water across the ocean. They were shipping pure, unadulterated weight. It is a flex of industrial and logistical muscle so vast, so completely unfathomable to a starving boy from the Rhine, that it simply breaks his mind. It is a quiet, devastating proof that the stories of American weakness, the radio broadcasts promising a swift victory, were all beautifully crafted, hollow lies. The weight of this single tin can is the weight of an entire continent bearing down upon him. It is the crushing realization that he is not fighting a human army that can be exhausted or outmaneuvered. He is fighting a titan of industry, a machine of endless, overflowing abundance that will simply bury him beneath a mountain of heavy steel and thick, lacquered cans. The profound, silent despair of this realization, the internal, psychological collapse of a soldier holding a discarded ration, is the true, unseen reality of the war. These deeply human moments, the quiet epiphanies born in the freezing snow, are so rarely captured in the sweeping pages of history books. They belong to the private, uncensored experiences of the men who lived them. If you feel a gentle calling to witness this unvarnished, raw side of history, to truly see the faces and the unedited realities of these distant days, I want to quietly share a resource with you. On Gumroad, there is a beautifully preserved, deeply moving collection of unseen media, raw, unfiltered images and quiet video fragments of the war that capture the harsh, uncensored truth of survival that is often too sensitive for traditional platforms. It is a profound way to bear witness to their true experiences. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Lucas sits back down in the snow, cradling the heavykin in his lap. He is joined quietly by another boy, a young, dark-haired soldier named Felix, whose lips are cracked and blue from the cold. Felix does not ask where the kin came from. He only stares at it with wide, hollow eyes, recognizing the same, impossible density that has so profoundly shaken his friend. With trembling fingers, Lucas uses the small, sharp blade of his pocket knife to puncture the thick metal lid. It takes a surprising amount of effort to break the seal, a testament to the quality of the tin. As the blade finally pierces the metal, a soft, pressurized hiss escapes into the quiet air. He works the blade around the edge, sawing through the heavy steel until the lid can be bent back. As he lifts the jagged circle of metal, the smell that rises from the kin does not belong in a winter forest. It is not the smell of pine needles, or damp earth, or the metallic tang of snow. It is the scent of a late summer orchard. Inside the heavy can, floating perfectly in a thick, clear, golden syrup, are halves of yellow peaches. They are impossibly bright, glowing like captured pieces of the sun in the dim, gray light of the woods. Lucas and Felix simply stare at them. They are fruit from a world that has not forgotten how to bloom. The sheer, vibrant color of the peaches is almost painful to look at in a landscape that has been entirely drained of color. Lucas does not have a spoon. He simply tips the heavykin toward Felix. The younger boy leans forward, wrapping his trembling, frostbitten hands around the cold metal. He presses the rim to his cracked lips and takes a slow, careful sip of the syrup. A single tear slips from Felix's eye, cutting a clean, warm path down his soot-stained cheek. The syrup is thick, viscous, and overwhelmingly sweet. It is a shock of pure, caloric energy, a rush of sugar that instantly soothes the raw, burning ache in his throat. It tastes of sunshine. It tastes of peace. Felix takes a soft, slippery half of a peach into his mouth. He doesn't even need to chew. It melts against his tongue, releasing a flood of sweet, fragrant juice. He swallows, his eyes closed, his breathing shuddering softly. He hands the heavykin back to Lucas. Lucas takes his turn. As the heavy, golden syrup coats his mouth, he is transported away from the freezing roots of the oak tree. He is back in his mother's kitchen in the valley, watching her carefully preserve the summer harvest in glass jars, the air thick with the smell of boiling sugar and warm fruit. He remembers the feeling of being entirely safe, entirely loved, entirely full. They pass the heavy can back and forth in absolute, reverent silence. They do not speak, because any word spoken aloud would break the fragile, beautiful spell of the peaches. They eat slowly, deliberately, savoring every single drop of the thick syrup, letting the sugary warmth settle deep into their hollow stomachs. For those few, suspended minutes, the terrible war around them simply ceases to exist. There is no front line. There are no artillery shells. There is only the quiet forest, the falling snow, and the shared communion of summer fruit in the dead of winter. When the can is completely empty, Lucas holds it upside down, letting the very last, thick drop of golden syrup fall onto his tongue. He sets the empty tin down in the snow between them. It is no longer heavy. The dense, impossible weight has been transferred from the steel into their own bodies, giving them a fleeting, miraculous burst of warmth and life. But as the heavy calories begin to work through their exhausted bloodstreams, the psychological weight remains, settling heavily over their shoulders like a damp woolen blanket. They look at the empty olive-drab tin. They understand now, with an absolute, quiet certainty, that their leaders have doomed them. They have been sent into the freezing woods to fight a ghost of an enemy they can never, ever defeat. You cannot conquer a nation that possesses the sheer, unbothered luxury of sending heavy cans of sweet peaches to a frozen battlefield. And yet, in this terrible realization, there is a strange, unexpected comfort. The anxiety of hoping for victory is gone. The frantic, desperate need to hold the line, to push forward, to conquer, it simply evaporates into the gray winter sky. It is replaced by a quiet, profound surrender in their hearts. They do not hate the Americans who left the can behind. They only feel a deep, exhausted awe. The pale sun finally dips below the horizon, plunging the forest into the deep, bruised indigo of twilight. The cold wind begins to weave through the pine branches once more, whistling a low, lonely song. Lucas and Felix pull their thin collars tight against their necks, leaning back against the roots of the oak tree. They are still soldiers. They will still have to march tomorrow, if they survive the freezing night. But as they close their tired eyes, drifting into a fragile, dreamless sleep, they are no longer fighting for a grand empire. They are just boys, carrying the lingering taste of summer on their tongues, waiting quietly for the inevitable tide of abundance to roll over them, hoping only that it brings with it the end of the war, and a chance to finally go home. The heavy tin can remains in the snow, a silent, empty monument to a world of plenty, slowly being buried by the gentle, falling snow. Sometimes, the deepest kind of bravery is simply the quiet, heavy decision to stay alive. Imagine a forest trapped in the absolute depths of winter, where the snow has fallen so heavily, and for so long, that the world has lost all its sharp edges. The trees are bowed, ancient giants wearing thick mantles of white. The sky is an endless, pale sheet of gray, pressing down on the canopy, trapping the freezing air in the quiet valleys below. In this frozen isolation, the silence is not peaceful, it is vast, echoing, and profoundly lonely. It is the kind of silence that rings in the ears, a heavy absence of life that makes the heart beat with a slow, frightened rhythm. Hidden within the deep shadows of a snow-drifted ravine, a small pocket of German soldiers is waiting for an end they know is inevitably coming. They are not a grand, formidable fighting force. They are the shattered remnants of a forgotten platoon. At their center is a man named Klaus. Before the uniforms, before the roaring speeches and the endless marching, Klaus was a carpenter. His hands were meant to shape warm, polished wood, to build cribs and kitchen tables. Now, those hands are wrapped in dirty, fraying wool, trembling violently against the biting cold of a rusted rifle. Huddled around him are 4 boys. They are so young that their faces, though smeared with soot and dirt, still hold the soft, rounded contours of childhood. They wear coats that are far too large for their shrinking frames, the heavy gray wool hanging off their sharp shoulders like blankets draped over fragile wooden frames. They have not eaten a real meal in over 2 weeks. They have survived on melted snow, the bitter dust of crushed acorns, and the cruel, synthetic grit of a bread that offers absolutely no warmth to their freezing blood. The hunger they feel is no longer a sharp, urgent cramp. It has evolved into a vast, floating emptiness, a dizzying hollow space that seems to consume them from the inside out. It makes the tall pines sway and blur in their vision. It makes their own voices sound distant and reedy when they try to whisper to one another. They are slowly, quietly fading away into the white landscape, becoming ghosts long before their hearts have actually stopped beating. They know the Americans are close. They can hear the low, distant rumble of heavy engines through the frozen earth, a steady vibration that hums against the soles of their ruined boots. They have been told to hold the line. They have been told that surrender is a betrayal of the highest order, an unforgivable sin against their homeland. The radio broadcasts, before their batteries finally died in the cold, had promised them that to surrender to the West was to invite unimaginable cruelty and humiliation. But propaganda is a fragile, paper-thin shield against the crushing weight of starvation. As the pale afternoon sun begins its slow descent, painting the snow in soft, bruised shades of lavender and blue, the wind shifts. It is a gentle breeze, rustling the highest branches of the pines and sending a fine, crystalline shower of snow drifting down into the ravine. And on that gentle wind comes a scent. At first, Klaus thinks his mind is finally breaking. He closes his eyes, leaning his heavy head back against the frozen dirt of the ravine wall, believing that the freezing cold has finally driven him to hallucinations. Because the smell drifting through the bare, shivering branches is not the smell of cordite, or damp earth, or pine sap. It is the smell of wood smoke, mingling with the rich, heavy aroma of simmering beef. It is the scent of roasted onions, of rendered bacon fat, of dark, boiling coffee. It is the smell of an American field kitchen, sitting just a mile or two across the snowy ridge, preparing the evening meal for an army that has never known the agonizing ache of an empty supply line. The 4 young boys lift their heads. Their hollow, sunken eyes widen. Their nostrils flare, pulling the freezing air deeply into their lungs, chasing the phantom scent. They do not speak. They are entirely paralyzed by the overwhelming, intoxicating reality of the aroma. It wraps around them like a warm blanket, a deeply physical reminder of a world that still knows comfort, a world where pots boil on stoves and mothers ladle thick, hot soup into porcelain bowls. The scent is a magnetic, unbreakable pull. It tugs at the very core of their survival instinct, bypassing their training, bypassing their fear, and speaking directly to the desperate, starving animal within them. Klaus looks at the boys. He sees the way they are staring out into the snowy woods, their bodies leaning forward, unconsciously drawn toward the smell. He looks at their blue lips, their pale, translucent skin, the terrifying fragility of their narrow necks. He knows, with absolute, heartbreaking certainty, that if they spend another night in this freezing ravine, at least 2 of these boys will simply fall asleep and never wake up. He thinks of his own wife back in Nuremberg. He thinks of the letters he has written her, letters that tried to hide the true horror of the winter, letters filled with brave, empty promises that he would return to her when the spring finally thawed the earth. Unearthing these deeply personal, desperate moments, the quiet internal turning points where men chose life over ideology, requires countless hours of reading through fragile, faded letters and diary entries hidden away in the archives of history. It is a gentle, careful work to rescue these deeply human voices before they are lost to time. If you find peace and value in these raw, unvarnished stories, and if you would like to support the massive research and time it takes to craft these soothing documentaries, I would be incredibly grateful if you considered leaving a small tip, even just $1, on my Ko-Fi page. It truly helps keep this history alive and allows me to continue bringing these quiet voices to you. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Klaus makes his decision. It is not a decision born of cowardice. It is a decision born of profound, quiet love. He will not let these children die in the dark for a war that has already been lost. He slowly unbuckles his heavy leather ammunition pouches. They fall to the snow with a soft, dull thud. He takes his rifle, a piece of wood and steel he has carried across a continent, and leans it gently against the trunk of a pine tree. He leaves it there. He turns to the boys. He does not give a loud order. He simply speaks in a low, gentle whisper, his voice cracking with emotion and thirst. "Leave them," he says, pointing a trembling finger at their weapons. "Leave everything. We are going to walk toward the smoke." The boys do not argue. There is no hesitation, no debate about honor or duty. The scent of the simmering stew has already conquered them entirely. They drop their rifles into the snow. They unfasten their helmets, letting the heavy steel fall away, leaving them bareheaded and entirely vulnerable in the freezing air. Klaus reaches into his pocket and pulls out a ragged, dirt-stained handkerchief that was once white. He ties it carefully to the end of a broken pine branch. They begin to walk. Climbing out of the ravine, their legs tremble with every step. The snow is deep, pulling at their exhausted muscles, but they move with a desperate, hypnotic focus. The wind continues to carry the scent of the food, growing stronger, richer, and more detailed the closer they get. They can almost taste the salt in the air. They can almost feel the steam rising from the heavy metal vats. Walking toward the enemy lines with your hands empty is a terrifying, unnatural act. Every dark shadow in the tree line looks like a hidden machine gun. Every snapped twig sounds like a rifle bolt sliding into place. Klaus walks in the front, holding the small, dirty white flag high above his head, his other hand raised in the air. The boys follow close behind him, walking in his footprints to save their strength, their hands held up, their eyes fixed firmly on Klaus's broad back. They do not look like soldiers anymore. They look like a parade of ghosts, a shuffling, exhausted procession of hollow-cheeked wanderers stepping out of the winter mist. As they crest a small, wooded ridge, the forest suddenly opens up into a wide clearing. And there, nestled among the trees, is the American encampment. It is a vision of impossible, staggering abundance. There are dozens of large, olive-drab canvas tents, thick and heavy against the wind. There are vehicles parked in neat rows. And in the center of it all, sending thick, glorious plumes of white steam up into the gray sky, are the field kitchens. Large, metal immersion heaters are roaring, boiling vast pots of water and thick, hearty stew. The American sentries see them immediately. The sharp, metallic click of rifles being raised echoes across the clearing. Klaus stops. He stands perfectly still in the deep snow, the dirty white flag fluttering weakly in the breeze. He does not speak English, but he cries out, his voice thin and desperate, "Nicht Skiasen. Bit. We are hungry. We are just so hungry." The American soldiers, bundled in thick, dry woolen coats, their faces flushed with warmth, stare at the figures emerging from the trees. They do not see the ruthless, terrifying enemy they have been fighting for months. They see a middle-aged carpenter and 4 shivering, starving children. They see the oversized coats, the ragged boots tied together with wire, the deep, hollow shadows beneath their eyes. An American sergeant, a man with a stern face but gentle eyes, slowly lowers his M1 Garand. He raises a hand, signaling to his men to hold their fire. He steps forward, his boots crunching loudly in the quiet clearing. He looks at Klaus. He looks at the boys, whose eyes are locked not on the Americans' weapons, but on the steaming metal pots sitting over the fires just a few yards away. The sergeant understands instantly. He has seen the horrors of the winter, and he recognizes the absolute, breaking point of the human body. He gestures with his hand, a slow, welcoming motion toward the center of the camp. "Come on," he says softly, his voice a low, calming rumble. "Come on down by the fire." Klaus lowers the white flag. The tension leaves his shoulders so rapidly that he nearly collapses into the snow. The boys rush forward, no longer caring about the men with the guns, no longer caring about the war. They stumble toward the incredible, radiating heat of the field kitchen. They are gently guided to sit on wooden supply crates near the roaring heaters. The sheer warmth of the fire is a physical shock, a glorious, painful thawing of limbs that have been numb for weeks. An American cook, wearing a heavy apron over his uniform, approaches them. He does not speak to them. He simply holds out a large, heavy metal ladle. He fills an olive-drab canteen cup to the very brim with thick, boiling beef and vegetable stew, and presses it into the trembling hands of the youngest German boy. He fills 3 more cups, handing them out one by one, and finally hands a cup of steaming, dark coffee to Klaus. The youngest boy holds the metal cup. The heat radiates through the aluminum, searing his frostbitten palms, but he refuses to let go. He brings the cup to his cracked lips. He takes the first sip. The rich, salty broth, the soft, yielding carrots, the tender, glorious strands of meat, it hits his starving stomach like a burst of pure, golden sunlight. It is a taste of absolute salvation. It is the taste of a world that has decided, in this small, quiet clearing, to pause its destruction and simply offer grace. The boy lowers the cup, and as the hot, caloric warmth begins to spread through his chest, a single, heavy sob breaks from his throat. He lowers his head, and the tears begin to fall, hot and fast, streaming down his dirty cheeks and splashing into the thick stew. The other boys are weeping quietly too, eating and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the sheer, staggering relief of being warm, of being full, of knowing that they are not going to die in the freezing snow tonight. Klaus sits by the fire, holding his cup of coffee. He looks at the American soldiers, who are watching them with quiet, respectful expressions. Some of them are holding their own cups of coffee, leaning against the sides of the tents. There is no hatred in their eyes. There is only a shared, profound understanding of the misery of the winter. Klaus takes a sip of the dark, rich coffee. The flavor is a beautiful, piercing reminder of the home he will now survive to see. He looks at the boys, their cheeks flushed with the heat of the fire, their stomachs finally full of heavy, nutritious food. The grand, sweeping tragedy of the war is still raging around them, miles away across the frozen landscape. But here, in this small pocket of warmth, beneath the towering pines, the war has simply ended. It was not ended by a bullet, or a bomb, or a signed treaty. It was ended by a shifted wind, a desperate walk through the snow, and the quiet, miraculous offering of a hot meal. As the evening sky deepens into a rich, dark indigo, and the stars begin to emerge above the canopy, Klaus closes his eyes. He listens to the comforting crackle of the wood fire, the soft murmur of the American voices, and the quiet, rhythmic breathing of the boys beside him. The heavy, terrible burden of being a soldier has been lifted from his shoulders, replaced by the simple, peaceful weight of a tin cup, and the warm, quiet knowledge that tonight, finally, they are safe. Fire is a remarkable thing. It can melt the frost from a heavy woolen coat, and sometimes, it can melt the invisible, iron walls between two terrified hearts. Imagine the deep, enveloping dark of the winter woods, long after the sun has surrendered to the night. The canopy of ancient pines forms a thick, black ceiling above, shutting out the stars, and closing a small clearing in absolute, hushed isolation. In the center of this clearing, a large fire is burning brightly. The flames dance and leap, painting the snow in warm, shifting shades of gold and deep orange. The wood cracks and spits, sending tiny, glowing embers floating up into the freezing air like a brief, magical snowfall of light. Sitting around this fire is a circle of young men. Just a few hours ago, they were hunting each other through the freezing mist. There were shadows in the trees, terrifying phantoms divided by uniforms, by language, and by the heavy, roaring machinery of a world at war. But now, in the gentle, radiating warmth of the flames, the uniforms seem to lose their meaning. The rifles have been stacked quietly in the snow, far away from the light. On one side of the fire sit the American soldiers. They are exhausted, their helmets pushed back, their faces smudged with ash and dirt. On the other side sit the captured German boys. They have been stripped of their weapons, their heavy leather belts unbuckled, but they have not been stripped of their humanity. Among them is a young German named Dieter. He is barely 18, though the hollows of his cheeks and the dark, bruised shadows beneath his eyes make him look decades older. He sits with his knees pulled tightly to his chest, trembling. The trembling is not just from the lingering chill of the forest, but from the sudden, overwhelming crash of adrenaline leaving his exhausted body. He is a prisoner now. He has surrendered. For years, the loud voices on the radio in his homeland told him that to fall into the hands of the Americans was a fate worse than the winter itself. They told him he would meet monsters, men without mercy, men who would mock his suffering. So Dieter sits in silence, staring into the heart of the fire, waiting for the cruelty to begin. Across the dancing flames, an American soldier is watching him. The American is young, too, perhaps a farmer's son from a place Dieter has never heard of. He has a thick wool blanket draped over his broad shoulders. He watches the way Dieter shivers, the way the German boy's eyes dart nervously toward the darkness beyond the trees. The American reaches into his deep canvas pocket. Dieter flinches instinctively, his breath catching in his throat. He expects a weapon. He expects a harsh command shouted in a language he cannot understand. Instead, the American pulls out a small, rectangular cardboard box. It is a K-ration, sealed tightly in dark wax to protect it from the dampness of the snow. The American uses his thumb to break the seal, opening the box with a soft, tearing sound that seems impossibly loud in the quiet clearing. He pulls out a small, heavy tin, and a packet wrapped in thick cellophane. He does not eat it. He looks across the fire at Dieter. He catches the frightened boy's eye, gives a small, tired nod, and gently tosses the items across the flames. They land softly in the snow, just inches from Dieter's ruined boots. Dieter freezes. He looks at the heavy tin. He looks at the American, who simply gestures with his hand toward his own mouth, urging the boy to eat. The other German soldiers turn their heads, watching in stunned, absolute silence. There is no trick. There is no mockery. There is only a quiet, gentle offering of life. With a shaking, dirt-stained hand, Dieter reaches down and picks up the tin. It is cool to the touch, painted in that familiar, flat olive drab. He finds the small key attached to the bottom, and with clumsy, frostbitten fingers, he begins to roll back the lid. The scent that rises from the open tin completely bypasses Dieter's mind and speaks directly to his starving, hollow body. It is pork, mixed with a rich, salty egg yolk. It is dense with calories, thick with fat, and overwhelmingly fragrant. Dieter closes his eyes. He takes a small bite. The flavor is a revelation. It is so rich, so heavy, that it brings a sudden, sharp ache to his jaw. He swallows, feeling the miraculous warmth of the food travel down into his empty stomach. It is the taste of a nation that has enough to share with its enemies. He opens the cellophane packet. Inside are thick, dense biscuits, completely untouched by the mold and damp of the forest. And beneath the biscuits, a small block of dark chocolate. He breaks the chocolate in half, turning to the shivering boy sitting next to him, and presses the piece into his friend's palm. The gesture is mirrored around the fire. The Americans, watching the starving boys, begin to open their own packs. Cans of cheese, packets of bright fruit jam, and heavy, sweet chocolate bars are passed across the orange glow of the embers. In this quiet, deeply beautiful moment, the vast and terrible war simply ceases to exist. They are no longer soldiers of opposing empires. They are just boys, lost in the dark woods, sharing a meal around a hearth. Dieter looks at the American who gave him the food. The American gives him a small, gentle smile, raising a battered aluminum canteen cup filled with steaming coffee and a silent toast. Dieter nods back, a profound, heavy knot of emotion rising in his throat. The lies of his leaders, the terrifying stories of American cruelty, crumble into ash and float away on the winter wind. You cannot hate a man who gives you his own food when you are starving. You cannot view a man as a monster when he looks at you with eyes that hold the exact same exhaustion, the exact same longing for home, that your own eyes hold. The American ration is not just a meal, it is a profound instrument of peace. It restores Dieter's humanity in a way that no treaty ever could. Finding these delicate, unrecorded moments of grace is a quiet and beautiful journey. These are the stories that are so often left out of the grand history books, the raw, unfiltered moments of connection that happen when the world looks away. Uncovering them requires digging deep into the uncensored letters and the private, handwritten diaries of the men who lived them. If you feel a gentle calling to explore this hidden, profoundly human side of history, and if you wish to support the long hours of research required to bring these whispers to life, I would love to invite you to join our quiet, close-knit community on Patreon. There, we share ad-free, extended podcasts, diving deeply into the raw, unblurred realities and the deeply personal letters of the past. It is a wonderful space for those who truly want to understand the fragile human heart of history. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the night deepens, the wind begins to howl softly through the upper branches of the pines, but down in the clearing, the fire holds the cold at bay. The boys have finished eating. The agonizing, hollow ache in the German soldiers' stomachs has been replaced by a heavy, soothing warmth. The language barrier between the two sides is absolute, a thick wall of foreign consonants and vowels. But around a fire, men do not need words to speak to one another. An American soldier, sitting on a log, reaches into the breast pocket of his heavy coat. He pulls out a small, worn leather wallet. He opens it carefully, pulling out a black and white photograph. He leans forward, handing it across the fire to an older German soldier. The German takes it gently by the edges, turning it to catch the light of the flames. It is a picture of a young woman standing on the porch of a wooden house, holding a small, laughing baby in her arms. The German soldier looks at the picture for a long time. His eyes soften. He taps the picture of the baby with his finger, looks up at the American, and smiles. "Sean," he whispers softly. "Beautiful." The German then reaches into his own tattered tunic. He retrieves a small piece of folded, delicate paper. He opens it, revealing a faded photograph of a woman with dark hair, standing in front of a cobblestone street, a small dog sitting faithfully at her feet. He hands it to the American. The American looks at it, smiles warmly, and nods. "Wife?" he asks gently. The German doesn't understand the word, but he understands the tone. "Frau," he replies, his voice thick with a sudden, overwhelming homesickness. "Mean Frau." Slowly, all around the fire, the wallets and the letters come out. Pieces of home are traded back and forth across the dividing line of the flames. Pictures of sweethearts, of aging mothers, of younger brothers, of farm dogs and front porches. They pass these fragile pieces of their hearts back and forth, pointing, nodding, and smiling. In the golden light of the fire, they see the absolute truth of their situation. The boy from Ohio and the boy from Bavaria are the same. They carry the same fears in their pockets. They carry the same love in their hearts. They have both been pulled from their warm beds, dressed in heavy wool, and sent into the freezing dark to shoot at shadows. Dieter sits quietly, holding a piece of the sweet American chocolate on his tongue, letting it melt slowly. He watches the exchange of photographs. He feels a strange, heavy peace settling over him. He is a prisoner, yes. His war is over. Tomorrow, he will be marched away to a camp, away from his homeland, away from everything he knows. But tonight, he is not afraid. He realizes that the men across the fire are not his enemies. The true enemy was the cold. The true enemy was the hunger. The true enemy was the terrible, roaring machine that had convinced them they needed to kill one another. The fire begins to burn down, the high, dancing flames settling into a deep, glowing bed of red-hot coals. The clearing grows dimmer, the shadows stretching long and soft across the snow. The exhaustion of the day finally overtakes them all. One by one, the soldiers begin to lie down. They do not separate into two distinct camps. They curl up on the pine needles and the packed snow, wrapping their blankets tightly around their shoulders, drawing as close to the dying heat of the fire as they safely can. Dieter lies on his side, his head resting on his arm. Just a few feet away, the American who had given him the food is also asleep, his breathing slow and steady, a gentle cloud of white vapor rising from his lips with every exhale. Dieter closes his eyes. He is warmer than he has been in months. His stomach is full of rich, sweet food. The scent of the wood smoke and the lingering aroma of the coffee wraps around him like a protective shroud. He listens to the quiet, synchronized breathing of the Americans and the Germans, sleeping side by side in the dark forest. There are no armies here anymore. There are no empires. There is only a circle of boys, resting quietly in the snow, bound together by the gentle grace of a shared meal, and the quiet, comforting glow of a single, fading fire. As the stars slowly turn above the black canopy of the trees, Dieter drifts into a deep, peaceful sleep, holding on to the quiet, beautiful knowledge that even in the darkest, coldest woods of the world, humanity can still find a way to keep itself warm. Even in the ruins of a broken world, it is often the quietest, most discarded things that tell the heaviest truths. Imagine a pale, winter morning, the sky the color of a dove's wing, completely still and silent. The heavy artillery has moved on, leaving behind a forest of ancient, shivering pines that seem to breathe a collective, frozen sigh. The snow here has been trampled, churning the pristine white into a soft, muddy gray. It is the site of a recently abandoned American encampment. The men who slept here have vanished, moving forward with the relentless, roaring tide of their army, leaving behind the hollow, quiet shell of their temporary home. Moving slowly through this empty space is a small group of German soldiers. They walk with the careful, hesitant steps of men who have forgotten how to feel safe. They are scavenging. They are looking for anything the wind might have left behind, a dropped glove, a forgotten blanket, perhaps a stray tin of food hidden beneath the drifting snow. Among them is an older soldier named Wilhelm. In the gentle, fading years before the war, Wilhelm was a schoolteacher in a small, quiet town. He was a man who lived a life surrounded by the comforting smell of ink, the soft rustle of book pages, and the bright, eager faces of children learning to write. He is a man who understands the profound, delicate value of paper. To understand Wilhelm's world now, you must understand a landscape of absolute, suffocating scarcity. In his homeland, everything has been surrendered to the fires of the war. There are no books being printed. There are no fresh, clean notebooks for the children. Paper has become a luxury so rare, so carefully hoarded, that it is treated like spun gold. The letters Wilhelm receives from his wife are written on scraps of coarse, gray paper, so incredibly thin and fibrous that the ink feathers and bleeds, the creases threatening to tear with every single reading. As Wilhelm walks through the snow, leaning heavily on his rusted rifle, something catches his eye. Half buried in a snowdrift at the base of a large oak tree is a piece of trash. He kneels down. His knees pop in the cold air. He reaches out with a ragged, fingerless mitten and pulls the object from the snow. It is an empty ration box. The food is long gone, consumed or carried away by the American soldier who had opened it. All that is left is the packaging. But as Wilhelm holds this empty box in his cold, trembling hands, a wave of profound, staggering shock washes over him. He does not look at it as a piece of garbage. He looks at it with the awe of a man holding a miracle. The cardboard is unimaginably thick. It is sturdy, completely unbending in his grip. But more than that, it has been treated. It is coated in a heavy, generous layer of waterproof wax. Wilhelm brushes his thumb across the surface. The melted snow simply beads up and rolls off, leaving the cardboard completely dry, completely intact. It has been sitting in the wet snow all night, and it has not softened. It has not dissolved. He turns the box over. The colors printed on the side are sharp, vibrant, and clean. There are layers to this packaging, an outer waxed carton, an inner protective sleeve, and inside that, he finds the discarded remnants of cellophane and silver foil. Wilhelm slowly sits back on his heels in the snow, his breath pluming in a soft, white cloud. He reaches into the inner pocket of his field coat, close to his chest where it might stay warm and dry, and pulls out the last letter he received from his wife. He holds the two objects side by side. In his left hand is the most precious thing he owns, a fragile, tearing, translucent piece of gray paper that holds the desperate, loving words of his family. It is dissolving just from the moisture in the winter air. In his right hand is a piece of American garbage. It is infinitely stronger, infinitely more expensive to produce, and infinitely more protective than the paper that carries the prayers of the German people. The realization is not loud. It does not come with the roar of a falling bomb. It comes as a quiet, devastating whisper in the back of his mind. He realizes that the Americans have so much wealth, so much endless, overflowing industrial power, that they can afford to wrap a single, fleeting meal in a fortress of wax and heavy cardboard, and then simply throw it away in the dirt. They are fighting a nation of titans. A nation that produces packaging designed to be destroyed that is stronger than the materials Germany uses to hold its entire civilization together. It is in these quiet, unseen details, the wax on a cardboard box, the cellophane wrapper, the hidden logistics of moving millions of tons of paper across a violent ocean, that the true story of the war was written. The grand battles took the headlines, but the war was truly won by these invisible networks of supply and the secret operations that protected them. There is an entire world of history hidden just beneath the surface of the things we throw away. If you find yourself captivated by the quiet, untold stories and the hidden mechanisms that shaped this era, I would love to invite you to join my free email newsletter. When you sign up, I will send you a complimentary copy of my ebook, The Shadow War, 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. Every week, we take a relaxing, deep dive into the forgotten facts, the hidden heroes, and the espionage that changed the course of the world, away from the noise of the battlefield. It is a wonderful way to keep the quiet truths of history alive. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Wilhelm does not throw the cardboard box back into the snow. Instead, he calls out softly to the other men in his group. They gather around him, looking like gray, exhausted ghosts in the winter light. He hands the waxed box to a young boy named Hans. Hans is barely 17, and his boots have completely worn through at the soles. For weeks, Hans has been walking on the frozen earth, using layers of useless, wet newspaper to try and protect his blistered, freezing feet. Wilhelm shows Hans the wax coating. He takes his trench knife and carefully, meticulously cuts the heavy American cardboard into 2 flat, sturdy squares. He hands them to the boy. Hans takes off his ruined boots, his feet blue and numb, and slides the waxed cardboard inside. It is a perfect, waterproof barrier against the snow. It is a tiny, localized miracle born entirely from the careless waste of their enemy. The other soldiers begin to scour the clearing, no longer looking for dropped food, but hunting for the trash. They gather the discarded waxed boxes, the heavy inner sleeves, the cellophane wrappers. They use this paper waste of titans to piece their broken world back together. One soldier uses a broad strip of waxed cardboard to patch a gaping hole in the canvas roof of their makeshift tent, knowing the rain will simply slide right off the American wax. Another carefully folds a pristine, dry piece of heavy white packing paper, tucking it into his tunic. He will use it tonight, by the light of a dying ember, to write a letter to his mother. He knows that this paper, unlike the fragile scraps from home, will survive the long, harsh journey back to Berlin without tearing. They sit together in the clearing, surrounded by the colorful, scattered debris of the American army. They do not speak of the grand implications of what they have found. They do not talk about the factories in Detroit or the massive convoys crossing the Atlantic. They simply sit in the quiet, freezing woods, drawing a strange, deeply tragic comfort from the garbage. Wilhelm watches Hans take a few tentative steps in his boots, a small, relieved smile breaking through the dirt and exhaustion on the boy's face. The heavy cardboard holds back the damp. For the first time in a month, the boy's feet might actually stay dry. As the pale sun begins to dip behind the skeletal branches of the trees, casting long, soft shadows across the snow, Wilhelm slips his wife's fragile letter into a discarded, waterproof cellophane pouch he found near a fire pit. He seals it carefully, protecting her delicate words in a fortress of American plastic. The psychological weight of the war has shifted completely. They are no longer men fighting for victory, they are men simply trying to survive the storm. And the very storm that is destroying them, the massive, unstoppable machine of the American military, is also, ironically, providing the very scraps they need to endure the cold. They are small, starving men living in the footsteps of giants. And as they pack up their meager belongings and prepare to march again into the gathering dark, they carry the bright, heavy paper waste of their enemies with them, holding it close to their chests, a quiet, heartbreaking shield against the bitter cold of a world that has left them entirely behind. There is a gentle kind of heartbreak in remembering what it feels like to be clean. Imagine the deep, unrelenting gray of the winter woods, where the frost clings to every surface like a second skin. For the young men trapped within this frozen landscape, the war was not just a battle of bullets and artillery, it was a slow, agonizing war against the elements, and against the steady erosion of their own human dignity. When you are living in a trench carved from frozen mud, the world shrinks to the size of your shivering body. For months, the German boys had not known the touch of warm water. Their heavy, field gray wool uniforms, once a source of sharp military pride, had become damp, rigid prisons. The wool chafed against their cold, unwashed skin, harboring lice and the lingering, sour smell of fear and exhaustion. Their hands were permanently blackened, the deep creases of their knuckles stained with rifle oil, soot, and the dark earth of the forest floor. When they ran their trembling fingers through their hair, it was thick and matted with dirt. They had slowly been reduced to their most primal state, stripped of the small, quiet graces that make us feel human. They were treated by their own high command not as young men, but as cogs in a failing, desperate machine. A cog does not need to be clean. A cog only needs to turn until it finally breaks. But late one afternoon, beneath the long, stretching shadows of the pine trees, a profound discovery was made. A small, exhausted patrol of German soldiers was moving quietly through a valley that had recently been vacated by the advancing American forces. The snow was heavily trampled, marked by the deep, wide treads of heavy trucks. At the edge of the clearing, resting in the snow where it had tumbled from the back of a hastily departing vehicle, lay a small, splintered wooden crate. The boys approached it with the slow, cautious shuffle of the deeply weary. They were looking, as always, for a forgotten tin of meat or a stray packet of coffee. But as a young soldier named Julian pried the broken wooden lid away, he did not find food. He found something that touched a completely different, deeply hidden kind of hunger. Inside the crate were small, neatly stacked parcels, wrapped in plain, moisture-resistant paper. Julian reached in and pulled one out. It was light, fitting perfectly into the palm of his dirty hand. He carefully peeled back the paper, expecting perhaps a solid block of bitter chocolate or a dense ration biscuit. Instead, a small, pale bar slipped into his palm. Julian stared at it. It was a simple bar of soap. But in his homeland, soap had long ago become a harsh, abrasive block of synthetic chemicals and lye, a substance that burned the skin and smelled faintly of ash and industrial factories. He slowly brought the American soap to his face. He closed his eyes and breathed in. The scent that rose from the pale bar was impossibly delicate. It smelled of clean cotton, of sweet natural oils, and perhaps a faint, lingering whisper of lavender. It did not smell like a trench. It smelled like a peaceful Sunday morning. In that single breath, Julian was no longer a starving soldier in a frozen forest. He was a small boy again, standing on a wooden stool by the wash basin in his mother's bright kitchen. He could almost feel her gentle hand scrubbing his dirt-stained knees, hear her soft voice telling him that a boy must always have clean fingernails before he sits at the dinner table. The sheer, overwhelming nostalgia of the scent hit him so hard that his eyes filled with sudden, hot tears. He passed the small bar to the soldier beside him. The other boy took it gently, holding it beneath his nose, and let out a long, trembling sigh. They looked back into the splintered crate. There were dozens of these small, fragrant bars. But there was more. Tucked neatly beside the soap were small, tightly wrapped bundles of toilet paper. To a modern mind, this might seem entirely mundane, an afterthought of daily life. But to a soldier who had spent months using harsh, freezing leaves, or the stiff, abrasive edges of old newspapers, these small rolls of soft, delicate paper were an absolute revelation. They were a luxury so profound it bordered on the miraculous. And scattered among the paper were tiny, colorful packets of chewing gum. Sweet, peppermint-scented gum, designed not to provide calories, but simply to offer a small, rhythmic distraction, a sweet taste to chase away the bitter flavor of fear in a dry mouth. Julian sat back in the snow, his hands resting on his knees. He looked at the soft paper, the sweet gum, and the fragrant soap. A quiet, shattering realization began to settle over the group. They understood the heavy tins of meat. They understood the warm coats and the waterproof boots. Those were the things an army needed to keep its soldiers fighting. But soap that smelled of lavender? Soft paper? Sweet chewing gum? These things had absolutely no tactical value on a battlefield. A man does not shoot his rifle any straighter just because his face is clean. The Americans had produced these items, shipped them across a vast, dangerous ocean, and carried them into the freezing woods for one reason, and one reason only. Because they cared about the comfort of their boys. It was as if the American government was not just a military apparatus, but a collective of mothers, reaching across the sea to make sure their sons were washed, that their breath was sweet, that they were afforded a small measure of dignity even in the very depths of hell. Julian looked at his own frayed, filthy uniform. He thought of his leaders, who ordered him to freeze and starve for a broken ideal, who viewed his suffering as a necessary sacrifice. And then he looked at the enemy's crate, overflowing with gentle, maternal care. The contrast was a heavy, crushing weight on his heart. He realized that a nation that loves its sons enough to send them soft paper and sweet soap is a nation that will never allow itself to be broken. These tangible, physical pieces of history, the small items a soldier carried in his pockets, the woven fabric of his gear, the everyday objects that kept him tethered to his humanity, are the true, beating heart of the past. Holding these artifacts, or immersing ourselves in the visual history of the era, bridges the vast gap of time and lets us feel the true emotional weight of their journeys. If you find peace and deep fascination in these stories, and wish to connect further with the physical reality of this history, you might find wonderful meaning in exploring genuine World War II memorabilia, or settling in to watch the beautifully sweeping and historically immersive film Midway, available on Amazon Prime. It is a profound way to honor the past. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Julian did not put the soap in his pocket to save for later. The desire to feel clean, to reclaim just a tiny fraction of himself from the grime of the war, was too powerful to ignore. He stood up and walked away from the group, moving silently through the trees until he found a small, narrow stream. The water was almost entirely frozen over, capped with a thick layer of cloudy ice. With the butt of his rifle, he struck the ice once, twice, until it shattered, revealing the dark, rushing water beneath. The air was bitterly cold, but Julian did not hesitate. He set his rifle aside. He unbuttoned the cuffs of his heavy tunic and rolled the stiff wool up past his elbows. He knelt in the snow and plunged his hands into the freezing water. The shock of the cold was a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs, but he welcomed it. It was a waking, living sensation. He pulled his dripping hands from the stream and picked up the pale American soap. He rubbed the bar between his palms. At first, nothing happened. But as he worked the soap, mixing it with the freezing water, a thick, rich, white lather began to form. The sight of those pure, white suds against the deep, ingrained black soot of his hands was almost hypnotic. He scrubbed his palms together, working the lather into the creases of his knuckles, under his fingernails, over his wrists. The fragrant scent of clean oils and lavender rose up into the cold winter air, entirely masking the smell of the damp earth. He splashed the freezing water over his hands to rinse them, watching the dark, gray water run off his skin and swirl away into the current. And then, he lathered the soap again. This time, he brought his suds-covered hands to his face. He closed his eyes and scrubbed his cheeks, his forehead, the back of his neck. He scrubbed away the sweat of the marches, the ash of the campfires, the invisible, heavy film of fear that had coated him for months. The cold water stung his cheeks, but the soap was incredibly gentle, leaving his skin feeling soft and remarkably alive. When he finally rinsed his face and dried it with a relatively clean corner of his wool scarf, he opened his eyes. He looked down at his hands. They were pale. They were clean. The deep, dark stains were gone. For the first time in a very long time, he felt like a human being. He walked back to the clearing. The other boys were sitting around the open crate. They, too, had washed in the snow, their faces flushed and clean, their hair smoothed back. They were sitting quietly, chewing the small sticks of American peppermint gum. Julian sat down beside them. One of the boys offered him a piece of the gum. Julian took it, peeling back the delicate foil wrapper, and placed it on his tongue. The sweet, sharp burst of peppermint was dazzling. As he chewed, the rhythmic motion seemed to ease the tight, anxious knot in his jaw. It was a small, simple pleasure, but in a world completely devoid of joy, it felt like a grand feast. They sat together in the fading afternoon light, smelling of clean lavender and peppermint. They were still deeply entrenched in a losing war. The winter was still pressing in around them. But the absolute misery of their existence had been momentarily paused. Julian reached into his pocket and touched the remaining half of the soap bar, feeling its smooth surface against his clean fingertips. He thought of the unseen American mother, far across the dark ocean, who had demanded that her boy be kept clean and comfortable. He felt a strange, quiet gratitude toward her. As the sky turned the color of bruised iron and the first stars began to pierce the twilight, the boys leaned back against the trees. They were warm in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the air. They were wrapped in a lingering scent of care. And as Julian closed his eyes, the sweet taste of peppermint on his breath, he drifted into the most peaceful sleep he had known in months, cradled by the quiet, fragrant proof that somewhere in the world, kindness still existed. A truth discovered in the quiet of the snow can be so much colder than the winter air itself. Imagine a stillness so deep it feels as though the entire world has held its breath. It is the very edge of winter, that fragile, liminal space where the deepest frosts begin to lose their grip, yet the spring is still nothing more than a whispered rumor beneath the earth. The forest is a cathedral of gray and white, the ancient pines standing as silent witnesses to the slow, exhausting tragedy unfolding beneath their heavy boughs. In a shallow dugout carved into the frozen mud, a young soldier named Friedrich sits alone in the dim, flickering light of a single, sputtering candle. His field coat, once a source of pristine pride, is now a heavy, damp patchwork of worn wool and fraying threads. He is incredibly tired. It is not just the physical exhaustion of walking miles through the deep drifts, or the lingering, hollow ache of starvation. It is a profound, quiet weariness of the soul. Resting in the palm of his dirt-stained, trembling hand is a small, heavy object. It is an American ration tin, found discarded by a roadside earlier that day. Friedrich does not open it immediately. He simply looks at it. He traces the smooth, perfectly painted olive drab metal with a numb thumb. He marvels at the precision of the seal, the heavy, unyielding density of the steel. In his homeland, everything has become brittle, fragile, and thin. His own equipment feels like a crumbling autumn leaf next to this solid, meticulously crafted piece of the enemy's world. For months, the radio broadcasts from the high command had filled their bunkers with roaring promises. The voices had told them that the Americans were weak, a soft people unaccustomed to the harsh realities of struggle. They were told that the enemy's supply lines were collapsing, that their morale was shattering, and that the German spirit would effortlessly conquer the decadent invaders. Friedrich, like so many young boys plucked from quiet villages and schoolhouses, had desperately wanted to believe those voices. It was the only warmth they had left to cling to in the freezing dark. But as Friedrich sits in the silence of the dugout, turning the heavy tin over in his hand, that illusion gently, quietly shatters into 1,000 irreparable pieces. He takes a small, worn trench knife and carefully breaks the vacuum seal. The soft hiss of the air escaping is the only sound in the bunker. He peels back the lid, and the scent of preserved meat, rich fats, and sweet tomatoes rises into the damp air. He takes a small bite, letting the rich, dense food rest on his tongue. It is deeply nourishing, a sudden rush of warmth and caloric energy that his body so desperately craves. Yet, as he swallows, a profound and heavy sorrow washes over him. The food is sweet, but the realization it brings is incredibly bitter. This is the bitter taste of defeat. It does not taste of blood, or smoke, or the violent end of a battle. It tastes like a perfectly preserved meal, shipped across a vast, violent ocean, wrapped in heavy metal, and given to a soldier with such abundance that he can afford to leave it behind in the snow. Friedrich closes his eyes, leaning his head back against the damp earth of the trench wall. He realizes, with a quiet, devastating clarity, that his own leaders have lied to him. They have sent him, and thousands of boys just like him, into the freezing woods to fight a ghost. They are not fighting an army of men, they are fighting an unstoppable, roaring engine of industry and care. You cannot defeat a nation that possesses the sheer, unbothered luxury of feeding its soldiers so magnificently in the middle of a wasteland. The psychological collapse does not come with tears or shouts. It comes as a soft, gentle release. The frantic, desperate hope for victory simply evaporates into the cold night air, leaving behind a vast, echoing emptiness. He realizes that the war was lost not on the battlefield, but in the factories, in the wheat fields, and in the quiet, undeniable proof of this small tin can. This quiet unwinding of the human spirit, these deeply private moments of realization in the freezing dark, are the true, hidden layers of history. They are the unvarnished realities that are so often smoothed over by the grand, sweeping narratives of the textbooks. To truly understand the profound emotional weight these young men carried, we must look beyond the polished stories and bear witness to the raw, unfiltered truth of their daily existence. If you feel a gentle calling to see the war through this deeply human lens, I want to quietly share a resource with you. On Gumroad, there is a carefully preserved collection of unseen media, raw, deeply moving images and video fragments of the war that capture the harsh, uncensored reality of survival, showing the things that are often too sensitive for traditional platforms. It is a profound way to connect with the true cost of history. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Friedrich sets the half-empty tin down on an overturned wooden crate. The initial rush of hunger has been satisfied, but the weight in his chest has only grown heavier. He reaches into the inner pocket of his tunic, close to his heart where the fabric is driest, and pulls out a small, crumpled piece of paper and the dull stub of a pencil. He must write to his mother. For the past 3 years, his letters have been brave, fragile fictions. He has written of grand advances, of high morale, of the thick, warm coats the quartermaster promised would arrive any day. He wrote those lies because he loved her, because he could not bear the thought of her weeping in their small kitchen in Bremen, imagining him shivering in the dark. But tonight, the pen hovers over the paper, and Friedrich finds that he can no longer construct the lie. The heavy American tin sitting beside him demands the truth. He does not write the words, "We have lost." The censors would never allow it to pass, and it would only bring her terror. Instead, he writes of the snow. He writes of the deep, quiet beauty of the forest at twilight. And then, he writes of the Americans. "Mama," he writes, his hand shaking slightly as the graphite scratches against the coarse paper. "The men from across the ocean are everywhere now. You would not believe the things they carry. Today, I found a tin of meat, so heavy and perfect, it could have come from the finest grocer in the city. They have coats that turn away the wind, and boots that never let the snow touch their feet. They have so much, Mama. So much more than we could ever dream of." He pauses, staring at the flickering flame of the candle. He knows she will read between the lines. She is a mother. She will understand the quiet, underlying message. She will understand that he is telling her the illusion is over. "Please do not worry for me," he continues, the pencil moving slower now. "I am warm tonight. But I think of our home constantly. I think the spring will come soon, and perhaps, with the melting snow, this long journey will finally end. Keep the kettle warm for me." He folds the letter with meticulous care, pressing the creases flat. It is a quiet act of everyday heroism. He is preparing her for the inevitable, softening the blow of the nation's collapse by showing her that the enemy is not a monster, but a titan of abundance. He is telling her that survival, not victory, is the only prayer left to whisper. Outside the dugout, the wind begins to pick up, whistling a low, mournful tune through the skeletal branches of the trees. The other men in his squad begin to file into the small earthen room, returning from their numb, freezing watches on the perimeter. They look like ghosts, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes vacant. Friedrich does not hide the American tin. He picks it up and offers it to the man closest to him, a grizzled sergeant who has fought in 3 different countries and lost a little piece of his soul in each one. The sergeant takes the tin. He looks at the rich food inside, then looks up at Friedrich. No words are exchanged. The shared understanding passes between them in the dim candlelight, absolute and unspoken. The sergeant takes a small bite, closes his eyes, and hands it to the next man. As the tin is passed around the small, freezing room, the bitter taste of defeat is shared among them like a quiet communion. It is the end of their belief in the war. The fanaticism, the anger, the desperate will to hold the line, it all dissolves in the rich, salty broth of the American ration. They realize that they are no longer an army standing between their homeland and destruction. They are simply a group of terrified, starving boys, caught in the path of a massive, unstoppable storm. The only thing left to do is to hold on to each other, to share whatever warmth they have left, and to wait for the storm to finally wash over them. Friedrich lies down on the damp earth, pulling his thin wool blanket up to his chin. He listens to the quiet, synchronized breathing of his friends. The heavy burden of being a conqueror has been lifted from his shoulders, replaced by the simple, peaceful desire to just be a boy again. The candle finally sputters and dies out, plunging the bunker into absolute darkness. But the dark no longer feels terrifying. It feels like a blanket, hiding them from the madness of the world above. The war will still rage tomorrow, the artillery will still tear the earth apart, but in the hearts of these young men, the battle has already ended. They drift into a deep, exhausted sleep, the bitter taste of truth lingering on their tongues, finding a strange, quiet comfort in the knowledge that they no longer have to pretend to be strong enough to hold back the tide. To write a letter from the other side of the world is to try and fold a quiet miracle into a small paper envelope. Close your eyes and imagine the profound, echoing silence that follows the end of a nightmare. For months, the young German soldiers had lived in a world composed entirely of shattering noise and biting frost. They had survived in frozen trenches, their bodies hollowed out by a starvation so deep it felt like a permanent shadow settling over their souls. But then came the day the rifles were finally lowered. The day the hands were raised. The day the terrible, roaring machinery of the war simply stopped. The journey from the shattered, gray forests of Europe to the prisoner of war camps was a passage through a surreal, waking dream. For many of these boys, it meant crossing a vast, dark ocean. They stood on the decks of massive transport ships, watching the ruined coastline of their continent fade into the mist. And when they finally arrived on the distant shores of the United States, they stepped into a world that completely defied their understanding. Imagine a young soldier named Johannes. He is 20 years old, though his eyes carry the heavy, ancient weariness of an old man. He steps off a train in the American Midwest. He looks up at the sky. It is a brilliant, unbroken blue, stretching endlessly over flat, golden fields of wheat. There are no craters here. There are no shattered trees or ruined church towers. And when the sun begins to set, something entirely magical happens. The lights come on. For years, Johannes has lived under the strict, terrifying rule of the blackout. In his homeland, the night was a time of absolute, suffocating darkness, designed to hide the cities from the bombers above. But here, in this vast, untouched country, the street lamps glow warmly along the roads. The windows of the farmhouses spill golden, inviting light out onto the grass. The Americans are not afraid of the dark sky. They do not hide. To Johannes, the simple sight of an illuminated window in the evening is a staggering, beautiful proof of peace. But the true shock, the profound emotional earthquake that would forever change the way these prisoners viewed the world, was waiting for them inside the wooden barracks of the camp. It was the first time Johannes walked into the mess hall. The room was brightly lit, warm, and filled with the gentle, murmuring voices of other young men. He was handed a smooth, clean metal tray. He walked slowly down the serving line, his heart beating a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He expected a thin, watery broth. He expected a small, hard crust of synthetic bread. He expected the meager, carefully measured rations of a captive. Instead, a smiling American cook in a pristine white apron scooped a massive, steaming ladle of mashed potatoes onto his tray. Next came a thick, generous portion of roasted meat, swimming in a rich, dark gravy. And then, at the very end of the line, rested a sight that made Johannes physically stop in his tracks. It was a basket, overflowing with thick, soft slices of pure white bread. And beside it, a large, chilled block of real, golden butter. Johannes stared at the bread. In Germany, even before the war had turned so desperate, bread was dark, heavy, and dense. White bread was a rare luxury, a delicacy reserved for the highest tables or the most special of holidays. Yet here it was, piled high in a simple wire basket, offered freely to captured enemies. He took a slice. It felt impossibly light in his trembling hand, as soft as a cloud. He took a small square of the butter. He carried his heavy, steaming tray to a long wooden table and sat down. All around him, the mess hall was filled with a stunned, reverent silence. Boys who had fought like desperate phantoms in the winter woods were now sitting quietly, staring at their plates. Johannes picked up the white bread. He spread the butter across the soft crumb, watching it melt into the warm pores of the dough. He brought it to his lips. The taste was a revelation. It was sweet, delicate, and overwhelmingly rich. It was the taste of absolute abundance. A sudden, hot tear slipped from Johannes's eye, cutting a clean path down his cheek. He did not cry out of sadness. He cried because the sheer, undeniable kindness of the food broke the last remaining defenses in his heart. The propaganda he had been fed, the stories of cruel, vengeful Americans who would starve and torture them, evaporated entirely in the presence of that single slice of buttered white bread. You cannot fear a captor who feeds you better than your own leaders did. But with this incredible comfort came a new, heavy burden. It was the quiet, lingering ache of survivor's guilt. Later that evening, the camp settled into a peaceful quiet. The barracks were warm, heated by large, iron stoves that radiated a steady, comforting glow. Johannes sat on the edge of his cot. He was wearing clean, dry clothes made of soft cotton. His stomach was completely full, a sensation so foreign it almost felt uncomfortable. He rested a small piece of thick, clean stationery on his knee. He held a pen in his hand. He had been given permission to write a letter home, to tell his family that he was alive. He thought of his mother, living in the ruined remnants of a city across the dark ocean. He knew that she was likely shivering in a damp cellar, rationing a few wrinkled potatoes, wondering if her son was lying frozen in a nameless forest. How could he possibly explain this world to her? Johannes touched the tip of his pen to the paper. The ink flowed smoothly, a deep, rich blue. He began to write, his handwriting small and careful. "My dearest mother," he wrote, the quiet scratch of the pen blending with the soft breathing of the sleeping men around him. "I am safe. The war is over for me. I am in America now, in a place where the sun shines warmly and the fields are vast and peaceful. Mother, please do not worry for me anymore." He paused, staring at the paper. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to tell her about the hot showers, the clean wool blankets, the soap that smelled of fresh pine. But most of all, he wanted to tell her about the food. "Mother," he continued, his hand trembling slightly, "you will not believe the things I am seeing. Today, they gave us meat with thick gravy. But it is the bread that I cannot stop thinking about. They give us weissbrot. White bread, Mother, every single day. And real butter. As much as we care to eat. I ate a slice today, and I closed my eyes, and I wished with all of my heart that I could reach across the sea and place a piece of it in your hands." Johannes stopped writing. A deep, private fear washed over him. He looked at the words on the page. Would she believe him? Or would she read this letter and think that his mind had broken? Would she think the Americans were forcing him to write these impossible things as a cruel joke? To a woman starving in the rubble, the promise of endless white bread might sound like a fairy tale, a cruel illusion woven by a censor. He took a deep breath, steadying his hand. He decided he had to tell the truth, no matter how impossible it sounded. It was the only way to share his peace with her. "It is true, Mama," he wrote, underlining the words gently. "It is not a trick. They treat us not as monsters, but as men. I am full. I am warm. For the first time in years, I am not afraid of tomorrow." These fragile, faded letters, written in the quiet glow of the camp barracks, are some of the most profoundly moving artifacts we have of the human experience. They capture the exact moment when the terrifying illusion of war was replaced by the simple, staggering reality of human grace. Finding these quiet voices, carefully translating their disbelief, their guilt, and their deep gratitude, is a delicate and painstaking labor of love. I spend countless hours searching through forgotten archives to rescue these intimate whispers before they fade entirely into the past. If you find comfort in these stories, and if you would like to support the massive research and time it takes to craft these relaxing documentaries, I would be incredibly grateful if you considered leaving a small tip. Even just $1 on my Ko-Fi page. It truly helps keep this fragile history alive and allows me to continue bringing these quiet voices to you. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Johannes slowly folded the letter, making the creases sharp and exact. He slipped it into the envelope and wrote out the address of his ruined street, hoping that the postman back home would somehow find her among the ashes. He lay back on his cot, pulling the thick, olive-drab wool blanket up to his chin. The barracks were quiet, save for the soft, rhythmic hum of the wind sweeping across the vast American plains outside the window. In the cots around him, other young men were experiencing the same quiet miracles. There was a boy from Berlin who had secretly slipped a spare slice of bread into his pocket during dinner, an instinct born of years of starvation, terrified that the abundance would disappear by morning. When the morning came, and he saw the baskets overflowing with fresh bread once again, he wept, finally understanding that he did not have to hide his food anymore. There were boys who marveled at the simple, everyday heroism of the American camp guards, men who occasionally slipped them extra packets of real coffee or a handful of sweet tobacco, sharing a quiet smile that bridged the vast, terrible chasm of the war. These German soldiers had been sent out into the world to conquer it, fueled by a dark, angry ideology. But in the end, they were not conquered by bullets or bombs. They were conquered by the sheer, overwhelming weight of a full plate. They were defeated by the scent of roasted meat, the taste of sweet butter, and the quiet, unbothered generosity of a nation that could afford to be kind. Johannes turned his head toward the window. He could see the distant, glowing lights of a small American town on the horizon. He thought of his letter, beginning its long, slow journey across the continent and over the ocean. He hoped it would arrive on a morning when his mother needed it most. He hoped the words would bring her the same gentle warmth that the iron stove was bringing him. The lingering scent of the evening meal still hung faintly in the air of the barracks. It was a sweet, heavy aroma that chased away the ghosts of the winter forests. The hollow ache in his chest, the fear that had been his constant companion for years, was finally gone. Johannes closed his eyes. For the first time since he was a young boy, he did not dream of the freezing snow, or the endless marches, or the deafening roar of the artillery. He dreamed only of a bright, warm kitchen, a table set for two, and a basket overflowing with soft, white bread. And as he drifted into a deep, unbroken sleep, surrounded by the quiet breathing of his friends, he rested in the beautiful, simple certainty that he had finally, truly survived. Memory is a quiet traveler, carrying the heaviest burdens in the lightest of forms, a sudden, sweet scent carried on a winter breeze. Imagine the world many, many years after the heavy guns have rusted into silence. The deep, punishing snows of the war have long since melted away, and the ancient forests of Europe have grown green and lush again, hiding the jagged scars of the trenches beneath a soft, quiet blanket of moss and fallen leaves. The broken world has slowly, painstakingly healed its physical wounds. But for the men who walked through that frozen nightmare, the war did not simply vanish when the treaties were signed and the borders were redrawn. It folded itself into their quietest, most private moments, living on in the sudden shift of the wind, or the deep chill of a damp evening. Picture an aging man. Let us call him Thomas. He is an old man now, with hands that have learned to plant gentle gardens and hold sleeping grandchildren, hands that no longer remember the heavy, freezing weight of a rusted rifle. He sits by his kitchen window on a quiet, fading Sunday afternoon. Outside, the winter snow is falling gently, dusting the cobblestones of his quiet street in a peaceful, silent layer of white. The house is incredibly warm. The old radiator hums a low, comforting tune in the corner. His wife is baking in the kitchen. The warmth of the hearth fire spreads through the room, casting a soft, golden glow across the wooden table. And then, the scent reaches him. It drifts from the oven, weaving through the air, completely invisible, yet possessing the power to instantly stop time. It is the deep, rich, undeniable aroma of vanilla. In a single heartbeat, the warm, safe kitchen fades away. Thomas is no longer an old man in a comfortable chair. He is 19 years old again, standing knee-deep in the biting, relentless snow of a forgotten forest. The air is so cold it feels like shattered glass against his pale cheeks. His stomach is a hollow cavern of starvation, a constant, dizzying ache that makes the tall pines blur and sway in his vision. His boots are wrapped in wet, freezing newspapers, and his gray wool coat is heavy with frost. He remembers the trembling, dirt-stained hands of his closest friend, a boy who did not survive to see the spring. He remembers those hands carefully peeling back the thick, waterproof paper of a captured American ration. He remembers the soft crinkle of silver foil, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the dead, silent woods. And then, he remembers the dark square of chocolate emerging from the wrapper, infused with the unimaginable, luxurious scent of real vanilla. For Thomas, and for thousands of boys like him who survived the freezing dark to become old men, that scent of vanilla is not just an ingredient in a Sunday cake. It is the exact, lingering scent of the moment they realized they were going to live. It was the aroma of a world that had not completely destroyed itself, a world that still had the time, the resources, and the gentle, maternal care to wrap something sweet in silver foil and send it across a violent ocean. When Thomas tasted that chocolate in the snow, the rich, heavy sweetness flooding his exhausted bloodstream, the terrifying illusion of the war simply broke. The vanilla told him that the enemy was not a monster, but a titan of abundance, a nation that brought the comforts of a peaceful home to the very edge of the battlefield. It was a taste of absolute grace in a landscape of complete misery. These sensory memories are the truest, most profound artifacts of the human experience. They are the quiet, deeply personal histories that are so rarely recorded in the heavy, leather-bound books of generals and politicians. The true story of the era lives in the lingering scent of a chocolate bar, and the faded ink of a desperate letter home, and in the uncensored, unvarnished diaries of the ordinary boys who simply shivered in the dark, waiting for the dawn. Finding these delicate, unrecorded moments of grace is a quiet and beautiful journey. These are the stories that are so often left out of the grand history books, the raw, unfiltered moments of connection that happen when the world looks away. Uncovering them requires digging deep into the uncensored letters and the private, handwritten diaries of the men who lived them. If you feel a gentle calling to explore this hidden, profoundly human side of history, and if you wish to support the long hours of research required to bring these whispers to life, I would love to invite you to join our quiet, close-knit community on Patreon. There, we share ad-free, extended podcasts, diving deeply into the raw, unblurred realities and the deeply personal letters of the past. It is a wonderful space for those who truly want to understand the fragile human heart of history. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Thomas blinks, his eyes wet with sudden, unshed tears, and the freezing forest gently releases him. He is back in his warm kitchen. The snow is still falling softly outside his window, but he is safe. He smiles, a quiet, melancholic smile, and breathes in the vanilla once more. It no longer brings him the sharp, desperate ache of starvation and fear. Over the decades, the memory has softened. It now brings him a profound, sweeping sense of gratitude. He survived. The world healed. And the sweetness returned. There are other veterans, scattered across the quiet towns and recovering cities, who carry similar ghosts in their pockets. Picture a retired baker in a small Bavarian village. He cannot smell roasted coffee without pausing, his hands resting on the flour-dusted counter. The rich, dark aroma transports him instantly to a damp, earthen dugout, where he shared a battered tin cup of American instant coffee with his shivering squad. He remembers how the heat of the liquid felt like a blooming flower in his chest, a tiny, miraculous pocket of warmth that kept his heart beating through the longest, darkest night of his life. There is an old, retired postman who still carefully folds the silver foil from holiday chocolates, smoothing out every tiny wrinkle with his thumbs until the metal is perfectly flat. His grandchildren watch him, puzzled by his quiet reverence for a piece of trash. But he is remembering the day he found a discarded American ration box, marveling at the sheer, impossible wealth of a nation that could wrap its food in precious silver. To him, the foil is a talisman, a shiny, tangible reminder of the day he realized the war was finally, truly over. These men lived the rest of their lives measuring the peace of the world by the simple, everyday abundances they had first discovered in those American rations. A thick slice of soft, white bread, a hot cup of sweetened tea, a single piece of peppermint chewing gum, these were no longer just mundane items on a grocery shelf. To a generation of men who had eaten sawdust and melted snow, these simple things were ongoing miracles. They were the daily, tangible proof that the madness had ended and that the world had righted itself. When these men gathered in the fading years of their lives, sitting around wooden tables in quiet, dimly lit taverns, they rarely spoke of the battles. They did not speak of the fear, or the deafening artillery, or the terrible cold that turned their fingers numb. Those memories were too heavy, too dark to bring into the light. Instead, they spoke of the miracles. They spoke of the day the winter fog cleared and they saw the enemy soldiers with their heavy, swollen haversacks. They spoke of the cans of bright, golden brass that held meat and sweet tomato sauce. They spoke of the peaches floating in heavy, golden syrup, glowing like pieces of captured sunlight in the gray snow. And always, they spoke of the impossible, lingering sweetness of the enemy's chocolate. The war had taken an unfathomable toll on them. It had taken their youth, their innocence, and so many of the boys they had grown up with. It had left them with deep, invisible scars that ached quietly whenever the winter winds returned to howl against their windows. But in the midst of that terrible, sweeping tragedy, the war had also given them a strange, unexpected gift. It had given them a profound, unshakable appreciation for the fragile, beautiful sweetness of simply being alive. It had taught them that even in the absolute depths of human suffering, when the world seems entirely lost to the ice, there is always a warmth waiting to be discovered. And so, the scent of vanilla continues to drift through the quiet kitchens of the survivors, a gentle, comforting ghost of the darkest winter. It is a whispered promise that the human spirit, no matter how deeply frozen, can always be thawed by a single, sweet moment of grace. It is a reminder that the most profound victories are not won with weapons, but with the simple, quiet act of sharing a meal, of offering warmth, of finding our shared humanity in the bottom of a heavy tin can. As the snow continues to fall outside the window, covering the world in a peaceful, silencing blanket, Thomas takes a deep breath. The cake is nearly done. The kitchen is perfectly warm. He closes his tired eyes, resting his hands in his lap, and surrenders to the comfort of the evening. The freezing woods are very, very far away now. The long march is over. Close your eyes, breathe in the quiet night, and know that the spring always returns, carrying with it the gentle, lingering scent of peace. The longest war a man will ever fight is the quiet, heavy battle to forgive. Imagine a forest breathing its very first sigh of spring. The deep, crushing snows that held the world hostage for so many agonizing months have finally begun to soften, their sharp, icy edges melting away into gentle, weeping drops of clear water. The heavy boughs of the ancient pine trees, relieved of their terrible white burdens, slowly lift toward a sky that is no longer the color of bruised iron, but a soft, pale, hopeful blue. The world is thawing. The earth is waking up. And the long, dark nightmare of the winter is finally, truly over. In the quiet aftermath of the silence, when the heavy guns had been loaded onto trains and taken far away, a new kind of stillness settled over the ruined landscape of Europe. It was not the terrifying, breath-holding silence of a battlefield waiting for the next strike. It was the vast, exhausted, peaceful silence of a world that had simply stopped tearing itself apart. For the young German soldiers who survived the frozen woods, the end of the war did not come with a grand parade or a booming proclamation. It came in small, quiet moments of profound realization. It came in the slow, trembling lowering of their hands, the heavy, metallic clatter of their rifles falling into the mud, and the sudden, overwhelming understanding that they did not have to be afraid of the shadows anymore. Imagine a boy named Elias. He is sitting on the crumbled stone steps of a ruined village church. The roof above him is gone, opening the sanctuary to the gentle spring sunlight. He is covered in the dust of a fallen empire, his uniform torn, his face hollowed out by months of endless starvation and paralyzing fear. He is waiting. He does not know what he is waiting for, perhaps for the Americans to march him away, perhaps for the world to simply end. He is so tired that the very marrow of his bones feels like heavy lead. A shadow falls across the stone steps. Elias slowly lifts his heavy eyes. Standing before him is an American soldier. He is a young man, no older than Elias. His olive-drab uniform is stained with the same mud, his boots scuffed by the same endless miles of walking. For a moment, the two boys simply look at each other. The air between them is thick with the ghosts of everything that has happened, the roaring machinery of hate that had spent years trying to convince them they were monsters meant to destroy one another. Elias braces himself, drawing a shallow, trembling breath, waiting for the harsh word, the cruel gesture, the final humiliation of defeat. But the American does not raise his voice. He does not raise his weapon. He simply reaches into his heavy canvas haversack. He pulls out a small, thick package wrapped in waxed paper. With slow, deliberate movements, so as not to startle the frightened boy on the steps, the American peels the paper back. It is bread. A thick, heavy slice of enriched white bread from an American field kitchen, baked just miles away behind the advancing lines. The American breaks the bread in half. The sound of the crust parting, the soft, tearing sigh of the warm dough, is the loudest sound in the ruined courtyard. He sits down on the stone step next to Elias. Not above him. Not as a conqueror standing over the vanquished. He sits beside him, their shoulders almost touching. And he holds out half of the bread. Elias stares at the offering. His trembling, dirt-stained hand slowly reaches out, his fingers brushing the soft, white crumb. He takes the bread. When he brings it to his lips and takes that first, tentative bite, something vast and ancient shifts within the world. The bread is soft, slightly sweet, and incredibly rich. It is the taste of a harvest he did not plant, from a country he has never seen. But more than that, it is the taste of absolute grace. In that single, quiet moment of breaking bread together, the war completely evaporates. The heavy, suffocating armor of ideology, the toxic poison of hatred, the terrifying myth of the enemy, it all shatters and falls away like dry mud crumbling from a worn boot. Elias looks at the boy sitting next to him, watching him eat his own half of the bread. He sees the exhaustion in the American's eyes. He sees the nervous way he chews, the way he looks up at the open sky, missing his own home, his own mother, his own quiet corner of the world. They are just two boys sitting in the ruins, sharing a meal in the gentle sunlight. This was the true, staggering power of the American rations. They were not just instruments of logistics or caloric fuel for a marching army. They were the very first ambassadors of peace. When a nation drops perfectly wrapped chocolate in the snow, when it packages its sweet peaches in gleaming brass tins, when it sends vanilla and sugar across a violent ocean, it sends a message that transcends language. It says, we are human. We love sweetness. We love warmth. We love our sons, and we recognize the humanity in yours. The food broke the psychological grip of the war long before the treaties were signed. A starving boy cannot harbor hatred in his heart for the hand that feeds him real butter. He cannot maintain the rigid, angry posture of a soldier when his mouth is flooded with the sweet, nostalgic taste of peppermint gum or the rich, dark warmth of real coffee. The rations dismantled the enemy from the inside out, disarming their terror with the simple, undeniable proof of compassion. Finding these quiet, miraculous turning points, these invisible bridges built over the chasms of war through the sharing of a tin can, is a beautiful, delicate journey. It requires stepping away from the loud, booming narratives of history and listening closely to the quietest whispers of the past. There is an entire, hidden world of human connection that shaped the outcome of the era, operating far from the front lines. If you feel a quiet calling to understand these unseen forces and the fascinating, hidden truths of history, I would love to invite you to join my free email newsletter. When you do, I will send you a beautifully crafted, free ebook called The Shadow War: 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. Every week, we take deep, relaxing dives into the forgotten facts, the secret heroes, and the profound, quiet moments that changed the world. It is a wonderful way to keep these vital stories alive. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the years passed, and the boys who survived those frozen forests grew into quiet, gentle old men, the memories of the artillery and the marching slowly began to fade, mercifully softened by the distance of time. But they never forgot the taste of that first American ration. They carried the memory of that sweetness with them for the rest of their lives. It changed the way they viewed the world. It taught them the incredible, fragile value of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not a grand, sweeping declaration. It does not happen all at once. For the German boys who had been led into the dark by their own broken leaders, forgiveness began with forgiving themselves for surviving when so many others did not. It began with forgiving the world for being so cruel. And it was made possible by the men across the lines who offered them a pathway back to humanity, paved with silver foil and waxed paper. Imagine Elias, many decades later, sitting at the head of a long, wooden dining table. The room is filled with the warm, golden light of candles and the cheerful, bubbling laughter of his children and grandchildren. The table is laden with food, roasted meats, fresh vegetables, and right in the center, a large, beautiful loaf of warm, crusty bread. Elias is an old man now. His hair is snow-white, his eyes crinkled with years of quiet smiles. He reaches out and takes the loaf of bread. He breaks it in half, the sound a soft, comforting echo of a ruined church courtyard so many years ago. He passes the bread down the table. He watches his grandchildren take the warm slices, slathering them in thick, sweet butter. They do not know the agonizing, dizzying pain of true hunger. They do not know what it feels like to chew on sawdust and freezing snow. They only know the warmth of this room, the safety of this house, and the deep, unconditional love of their grandfather. Elias watches them, and a profound, heavy peace settles over his heart. He thinks of the young American boy on the stone steps. He wonders where he is, if he too is sitting at a table surrounded by laughter, breaking bread with his own family. He sends a quiet, silent prayer of gratitude out into the universe, thanking the boy, thanking the beautiful, abundant world that finally brought the winter to an end. The story of the U.S. rations in the freezing woods of Europe is, ultimately, a story about the absolute resilience of the human heart. It is a reminder that no matter how deep the snow gets, no matter how entirely broken the world seems, the desire to be kind, to share warmth, and to comfort the suffering will always find a way to break through the ice. The tin cans, the cellophane wrappers, the brightly colored boxes of food, they were the paper waste of titans, yes. But they were also the seeds of forgiveness, planted in the frozen mud, blossoming into a peace that would last for generations. They proved that while hatred is loud, and fear is paralyzing, love is simply heavier. It is denser. It carries a weight that can anchor a drifting soul and pull a starving boy back from the absolute edge of the abyss. As we reach the end of this journey through the dark, snowy pines, I want you to take a deep, slow breath. Let the cold of the winter woods fade away entirely. Let the sound of the wind be replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of your own peaceful heart. The boys have all gone home. The fires have burned down to soft, glowing embers. The heavy woolen coats have been folded and put away. The world is safe, and the long, terrible night is over. May you always find warmth when the world turns cold. May you always find sweetness in the darkest of places. And may you always remember the profound, quiet miracle of a shared piece of bread, a simple act of grace that bridged the impossible divide and brought the gentle, lasting light of forgiveness back into a broken world. Sleep well, let the ghosts of the past rest in peace, and know that tomorrow will always bring a brighter, softer dawn.